Welcome back to Off Ball Takes. This is your host, Yarby Laws, and this is my co-host.
Christopher Wells.
We are here with a live action, or not action, but live reaction, excuse me, to the 2025 NBA free agency. You know, we've already kind of gotten some rolling news, here and there over the past few days, about teams retaining certain guys, some weird buyout stuff as well. But before we do get started, please don't forget to like and subscribe and follow us on Instagram and TikTok at the OBT Podcast for more content and updates.
Yes, we are here. It is currently 5:51. We are 9 minutes away from what could potentially be one of the greatest free agency classes ever assembled. Might even top the one from, I believe it was 2019, right? Where it's like Kevin Durant, Kawhi Leonard, amongst others. And, this one, we did have, like you said, a number of players that kind of already have started to either re-sign with their former teams, or there's even some that have come out where it's like, okay, this guy is probably going to go to this team. Like we've heard stuff like, say, Dennis Schroeder is supposedly going to go to Sacramento, right? Like we've heard D'Angelo Russell supposedly is going to go to the Mavs, right? In addition to, like I said, all the other guys getting re-signed, like Naz Reid, $125 million for 5 years. Julius Randle, 3 years, $100 million. Harden, right? 2 years, $81 million. So far, there wasn't really a ton of stuff that I guess was quote unquote shocking, surprising. Of course, you did have some of those trades, but obviously you had the big thing with LeBron. I know Chris Haynes was talking to Rich Paul, and I guess he kind of cleared up some of that, right? Where I guess because there was some just kind of controversy in terms of like what he was talking about and what Rich Paul was talking about and what he meant by that. But I guess Rich Paul came in and basically try to confirm, like, yeah, he's not asking for a trade. He's not, doing any of that. And there's no issues or worries about an extension. Right now, he's just focused on being in LA and playing for LA. But I don't know, because there was reporting from some other reporters that kind of hinted at the idea of maybe the Lakers are looking past LeBron, right? Where it's like they're kind of potentially maybe not doing as much as they could do this offseason because maybe they're preparing to get Luka a new superstar post LeBron whenever he's done or whatever. So just kind of something worth noting just because it is significant. And obviously the Lakers are one of those teams that's looking to try to make some type of move, right? It's not going to be like a superstar, but there are centers on the free agency market that they're waiting for. Maybe Deandre Ayton, right? Obviously, he can't officially sign anything today because it's the moratorium period. But you may hear something about like, oh, once he clears waivers, then he may agree to go to the Lakers or some other team. Because there are other teams that could use him, and there are other teams that are vying for center options as well. But over the last few hours, this is where we started to get more and more rumors about where some guys might go.
Yeah, and it's kind of interesting. I feel like the four biggest names now, are going to be Miles Turner, Kuminga, Josh Giddey, and DeAndre Ayton, right? Like I would assume those are the guys that people are, monitoring the most. And I think we all know Miles Turner is going to return. DeAndre Ayton, that's kind of up in the air. Josh Giddey, who knows?
Yeah, we know he's not returning to Portland.
Yeah, exactly. And Kuminga, you and I are both more on the page of, well, he's probably not going to be a Warrior, but we'll see. So it is kind of a weird class, not, super star-studded, but I think there's a lot of role players here that can definitely, help some contenders.
Yeah, and again, there's been stuff getting pushed out about, again, some guys that may go to different places. Like there were, I think Mark Stein, Jake Fisher, and others were talking about, say, like a Ty Jerome, right, who was in Cleveland, where now they think, a lot of teams think he may go to Memphis, right, where we didn't really have Memphis pegged as a team that was going to get him. But if they were able to get him, of course, we don't know for sure, but if they were able to get him, then that would be a solid signing because you get, a backup point guard who can, help you offensively if Ja's out. I guess they already have Scottie Pippen Jr., but, Pippen also is kind of like a POA guy defensively as well. That's not really Ty Jerome. But, if you can get a guy like that, that can help. And I guess that kind of, they're making the case that, okay, we traded Desmond Bane. He's a really good player, but maybe there's a potential to have some level of production or replace some of his production with a combination of these different guys. So KCP, Cole Anthony, Jalen Wells, Cedric Howard, the guy they just drafted, and then maybe if they get Ty Jerome, different players, different positions, but could that be something, in their opinion, right, in their mindset, that would make it worth trading Desmond Bane, especially when you look at the picks that they got back and everything else.
Yeah, I think it would be, right? Like, you
Yeah.
look at it, you turn deeper, right? You get a lot deeper at that position, and elsewhere too. And yeah, I think it allows you to get younger and probably a little bit more flexible.
Yeah. So we did get from Michael Scotto that the Charlotte Hornets and Josh Okogie have agreed to push back the decision date on his $7.75 million non-guaranteed salary to July 15th. So that could potentially mean maybe they may need to use his contract in some type of deal, right? So obviously we don't know for sure, but that's not a free agency notification, but obviously the Hornets just made a trade the other day, right? Like what was it? Colin Sexton and Yusuf Nurkic basically swap spots. And Sexton will probably be their new other guard outside of Trey Mann, who might be gone. And then, maybe you use a Kogi and a deal for something down the line. I don't, because July 6th, some of these deals won't even get done until then, because some of the deals can't be done until the new calendar year rolls over for the NBA.
Yeah.
And then I guess, so since we have basically 3 minutes until the start of the moratorium period, I guess we probably don't really have a ton of time to talk about all the signings that have already happened. I mean, we kind of already mentioned on our regular episode, right? All the guys that re-sign, all the guys that could potentially move on. But I guess we should probably focus on which guys do we kind of expect within the first few minutes of free agency to probably get signed.
Yeah.
What are we looking at?
Yeah, that's kind of interesting. I really don't know here. I would hope that we get the Nickeil Alexander-Walker one out of the way. I would hope that we get D'Angelo Russell out of the way. Kind of the ones that were kind of hinted at, a little bit before, free agency actually started. Like these talks have already clearly happened. So I would assume, guys like that, like I kind of want to get those out of the way. Even Dorian Finney-Smith, that one as well. So, then the dominoes can really start to fall, because once that happens, then, that opens the door for DeAndre Ayton. That opens the door for guys like Ty Jerome, a lot of other guys too. So yeah. Clint Capella as well. And I think those are the ones that we really need to focus on.
Yeah, and they've also put out recently that the salary cap will be set at a little over 154 million for next season, and then the first apron will be at 195, second apron will be at 207, and then the full MLE will be about 14 million. So not too much different, I think, from this previous season, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah, so pretty much basically what everybody thought, because I think it's supposed to be like a 10% increase per year. They're not supposed to have another year like 2016 where the cap spiked by a bajillion dollars, and then all of a sudden you have all these guys getting paid more than they probably should have, but teams had more money than what they could do with it.
Yeah.
So we'll see. But I guess, do we have any real predictions maybe for who the actual first guy might be? And if so, where do they go?
Yeah. I'm hoping Nickeil Alexander-Walker to Atlanta. That sounds like, that would be a huge win for Atlanta off rip. I think, them making the first move, that would be pretty amazing. You add on to the defensive-minded backcourt and defensive-minded wings that you have on that team, to surround Trae Young and kind of hide and mask, his flaws defensively, right? I think that would be awesome, right? Because then you have a clear set lineup, and then obviously you could do maybe a little bit more if you really want to, but getting that guy would be amazing for them.
Yeah, if they were able to land him, that'd be a really quality signing, and that could help push Atlanta closer, right, to being one of the better teams in the Eastern Conference.
Right.
So DeAndre Ayton, I guess, since he's probably going to be one of the biggest names mentioned, and we may not get anything official about him, right? We said that we think that it might be the Lakers that might make the most sense for him. I believe he gave up, $10 million in that contract buyout. So that's kind of interesting, because usually they kind of give away about what they're probably going to get signed for. But the full MLE is like 14 million. So it's possible he may take a little bit less than that. But are you still kind of in the same spot of you think the Lakers would be the best scenario for him? Or do you think that there's another team that maybe just that we didn't think about when we last recorded?
I think it's between Lakers, Warriors, right? Those are two teams that are in desperate need of, some real center minutes. Like, and I think, DeAndre Ayton's by far not like the most elite center, but he's so much better than what those teams had last year, right? Like you think about it, he's better than Jackson Hayes. He's better than a guy like Quentin Post, Kevon Looney, even Draymond at the 5, right? So I feel like, if they can land him, if either of those teams can land him, then I think it puts them in a different level, and I think I could take them a little bit more serious, in that regard, right? Like I'd be more afraid of, a team that has Steph, Jimmy, and Deandre Ayton than Steph, Jimmy, and freaking Quentin Post. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was kind of interesting because uh, I think there was reporting from Mark Stein that Horford was a potential target for Golden State. So if they were able to get him, I mean, is that a signing that you would like? I don't know. He probably is a backup, but he's shown that he could still play. It's a stretch big. Obviously, he's an older guy, so there's always the question and concern of, is there a drop off that just kind of just happens as a result of being an older player? But if there's not much of a drop off, that could potentially be a quality signing.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I would like that depth wise, right? I think that kind of pushes Post down the the ladder a little bit. But I wouldn't mind that, right? I think I'd feel a little bit more comfortable having Kevon Looney and Al Horford on the roster, as the front court. Like I wouldn't mind that at all. I think that gives you a little bit of versatility because he can play the 4 as well. Say Draymond needs a break or something like that. He can go out there and play the 4 easily and be a switchable guy on defense.
Yep. Yeah. And we got our first notification. The Utah Jazz have guaranteed the $3.68 million non-guaranteed salary of Shvi Mikhailuk for next season. So not really, not really your typical
Dang, man.
6:00, 6:01 free agency signing. But
Right.
hey, it's something that the Jazz are doing in addition to the deals that they've already done in terms of the Sexton trade.
Yeah. Are you, like
Yeah.
let's talk about Utah for a second because I feel like people haven't really talked about them enough. Did you like what they did in the draft? Did you like what they did with Colin Sexton? Like, where are you on them? And does it make you feel kind of crappy about where the future's headed, or are you kind of hyped that they did get Ace Bailey?
Well, they're still probably not going to be very good, but I think if you're talking about Ace Bailey, it's hard to pass up on him because he's a very talented player, and the best version of him is going to be one of the best players in this draft class, right? We know he can score. We know he's got great physical gifts. It's just, can he do some of the other stuff? We know ideally didn't really want to go to Utah, but obviously they didn't care. They just felt like, well, we're not going to pass up on this guy. And it's not like he could hold out and not play. Like, I'm pretty sure he already showed up and did his conference and whatnot. So he's going to be a Utah Jazz. So I don't really have an issue with that. The Sexton Nurkic trade was a little surprising. I feel like if you're the Jazz, it's kind of underwhelming that you thought, all right, maybe they can trade Sexton, maybe they can trade Clarkson. But a couple hours ago, right, Clarkson, he's going to be a buyout guy now, right? Maybe he goes to the Knicks, maybe he goes somewhere else. And then Sexton, they basically dumped in a deal for Nurkic, right? Yusuf Nurkic. So they didn't really get anything back for those guys. So that's kind of disappointing. But it does clear the door open for those young guys to play and actually get minutes, right? Like you don't have to compete with Jordan Clarkson or Colin Sexton for minutes. Like all those guys can just play whatever they normally get. We can see if those guys are good or not. You would think Markkanen now, I think at this point, he shouldn't be a guy that's like a complete lock to stay there, right? Because now he's making probably more money than you would like. I think if you're, the Utah Jazz, of course, he's right now paid like their franchise guy, but we know he probably can't be a number one. So according to Chris Haynes, so this is kind of the first, not official signing, right? But the first notification Sacramento Kings have arranged meetings via Zoom to talk with Dennis Schroeder and Russell Westbrook. Kings looking to acquire both, but have other point guard options to speak with. That would be a pretty entertaining group of players to have on the same team, because you're going to have, if that were to actually happen, let's say they were able to get both, you'd have Schroeder and Russ. Now, they've already played together. They both played together in LA. Happy times, fun times, not really. And then you have DeRozan, Levine, Malik Monk, Sabonis. It's a wild combination of different players to play together. I mean, the Kings, you can't count them out in terms of doing anything and everything at this point. It kind of feels like a lot of the smart tactical moves that they had made in the last few years have just kind of disappeared. It doesn't feel like there's any real rhyme or reason to what they're doing.
Yeah, for sure. It is a weird weird
Yeah.
team. I don't know. That's definitely one of the more odd scenarios and situations I think in the league, and it's wild because that it used to be a solid team. We never really believed in it, but hey, it is what it is at this point.
Right. So we'll see what ends up happening there. But, as of right now, it is 6:06, and we do not have a single signing reported yet outside of what we just read. And that wasn't even a signing. That was just, hey, these guys are meeting together.
Yep.
So we haven't had anything yet. But I guess if we're going to go back to maybe some of the previous discussions that we were talking about before, um, I guess the LeBron thing. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's there's always going to be, a lot of stories when I think anything involves LeBron, but it's kind of like we talked about on the regular episode, right? We don't really think that he would not be a Laker by the start of the season, right? I think his plan is probably going to be to retire as a Laker, but at the end of the day, you do have to consider what's best for yourself, right? If they're going to build around Luka, does that technically mean they're building around LeBron as well, right? Because clearly he still wants to win, he still wants to be in a winning situation. And I think LA can be that if they do it properly, right? But
Mhm.
I don't really see a need for him to move on because I think that's going to require a lot of moving pieces around the league, right? Because if he moves, then you have to find a way to make that equivalent in the salary without destroying the infrastructure that you already have on another team. So I don't know how that would work per se. So maybe he moves on at a different point, but I don't think it's going to be this season at all, or even maybe next season. Who knows?
Yeah, exactly. And maybe there's also and like you said, I think that's the other aspect that's important too. Just that the Lakers, I guess, if they're at the point where now they're going to start building around Luca, right, and he doesn't factor into their long term plans as much, then yeah, maybe he might feel a certain type of way about it. But like I said, I don't think he's going anywhere right now. So we did get from Kelly Iko from The Athletic, who covers the Houston Rockets. He put out that they are re signing veterans Jeff Green and Aaron Holiday to 1 year deals at the veterans minimum. So that was something that had been reported, I think, from Shams a few days ago,
Mm-hmm.
right? So we kind of knew that the Rockets were already pretty active in free agency, including re-signing a lot of their own guys. Like they're gonna re-sign Steven Adams.
Yep.
These guys are getting signed too. They've already agreed at some point, right? They're gonna do the official extension for Jabari Smith Jr. So nothing wrong with that, and their minimum deals.
Yeah,
And those are guys that are also like locker room guys, reserve guys at this point.
I don't think you can really complain about that, right? They've been there, to kind of establish a little bit of culture, right? And they're the vets, like you said, and you definitely need those kind of guys on the team.
Yeah. And I guess, in the case of Jeff Green, right, he's reunited, I guess, with Kevin Durant again because they played together that 1 year in Brooklyn.
Yes, sir.
Yep. So,
And did they not play together in Oklahoma City too, or am I just
yeah,
being stupid?
they did.
Okay, yeah,
They did.
yeah, figured. Cool.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's see. So now, we got from Jake Fisher. The Kings are also planning to meet with Malcolm Brogdon per sources, among their other point guard options. Doesn't have to be, but the Wizards are willing to help facilitate a sign and trade with Brogdon. So if you're the Wizards, right, you'd probably like to do that because then you can get something for him. And I guess if he's not willing to take a minimum, that's probably where you'd have to do a sign and trade. So I don't know how that's going to work. I guess it'll depend on who's available and who wants what. I guess if you're the Wizards fan,
Mm-hmm.
let's say there was a Brogdon sign and trade. I don't
Mm-hmm.
know what the salary amount would be.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything you'd be looking for in return? You're probably not going to get much, right? You're probably going to get like either a second or a guy that that doesn't really play that they don't want. But is there anybody that's kind of like you're thinking about?
I mean, I'd have to take a look at the Kings roster, right? I'd be glad to get rid of Brogdon, right? And it's not even because he's a bad player. I just don't think he's really going to fit our timeline anymore at this point, right? We kind of already have, I think, a solid group of vets to accompany the new young guys on the block. So I have no problem moving on from a guy like that. Let's take a look at their roster and see what could potentially match up, right? Yeah, I don't know. This roster is kind of funky. At this point, I would take anybody, to be honest. Like, if they want to give us I don't know, like Jake LaRavia or something. I wouldn't mind that. I don't know, just anybody in a second round pick. I'd be okay with that at that point. Like,
Yeah,
I would want maybe like somebody a little bit younger, but
yeah.
younger than
I think
Brogdon.
he's. Yeah, I think he's a free agent. So
Oh, there you go.
yeah, so unless yes, he'd have to do a double sign and trade.
Yeah, they
So
wouldn't
I
do
guess
that.
the question I'd have to ask right now is, where are the signings? It's 6-11, and we haven't really had any real signings other than the Houston Rockets one. Are these guys, are these guys eating dinner right now?
Maybe. I mean, think about it. Look at the guys that we talked about, right? It's not there's no like stars, right? So there
Mhm.
might truly not be a rush for a lot of these guys to be signed, right? Think about the quality of player. It'd be different if we were talking about, some star talent where, there's a lot of buzz behind this stuff, but I feel like, there's probably not a whole lot of engagement or, maybe there's not a whole lot of offers. Who knows? We'll see. We'll just have to kind of ride it out, I guess.
Yeah, I think we're kind of I think we're kind of expecting, that some things are going to happen, right? Like I think we mentioned, like we feel like chances are Dorian Finney-Smith probably heads to Houston.
Yeah.
We think that Ayton. I don't know if we're actually going to get anything today, but at the end, maybe he goes to the Lakers. Brook Lopez up in the air. There's lots of people who cover the Lakers who thinks he goes there. I don't know if it's both him and Ayton, or maybe they think it's more likely they get Lopez instead of Ayton. I don't know, but and then I think it was also out there with Capella, right? That I think it was the Spurs, it was the Lakers, and I think another third team that was interested in him. So again, the center free agency market is pretty slim. There's not really like a ton of great options out there. Most of these guys are guys where it's like in a pinch they're going to start, but they're ideally not like the most ideal options for you at the starting center spot.
Yeah.
So I guess of all those, all right. So let's say Ayton goes off the board. Who's the next best center that you like of that group?
Clint Capella. I think there's no
Mm.
question about it. He's quality big man. We know what he can do. We know that he's a certified rebounder, certified rim protector as well. And I think he could be a starting center on a contending team that definitely needs one. Right? Like say the Lakers hit on Deandre Ayton. Cool. The Warriors should go out and prioritize a guy like Clint Capella. Right? He's a good physical screen setting big. Excuse me, who can kind of hold it down low. So I think that would be pretty cool to see.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, again, there's there are teams that need a center desperately, right? Or their center depth is relatively slow or relatively small, no pun
Yeah.
intended.
Yeah.
So we'll see what those teams end up doing. And again, like there's some other guys like Luke Cornett. Does he leave Boston and go elsewhere? I could see him getting some, maybe not the full MLE, but I could see him getting some type of exception level money. I think that that's pretty possible. Not I'm not saying that that's what's going to happen, but I think he's more than a minimum contract big.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. So, but I mean, we'll see because it's like you said, it's a good point where they're not necessarily stars, superstars in free agency right now. So a lot of these guys, like you said, in theory, could take their time, could weigh all their options, like how probably a number of players normally do, and it maybe who knows, maybe it'll be longer than an hour. But it's just funny because, for a long time, there's always the thought process of we know that tampering happens. A lot of these deals, like, there's no way that these deals happen like 1 minute after free agency opens and nobody's talked to anyone. But
Right.
it's different right now because again, we're at 6:15, so we're you know nearly 20 minutes after the opening of free agency, and so far you got nothing.
Yeah, no signings is kind of crazy.
Yeah, I think this is the first time that I can remember that we haven't
Okay.
had. Oh, there
So
we go. So we
yeah,
got
Jaren
the
Jackson
Memphis
Jr.
Grizzlies.
All right.
So there you go. So from Shams Charania, which again, not free agency signing, but this is something that we expected, right? Where Jaren Jackson Jr., 5-year, $240 million maximum renegotiation and extension. So it's a lot of money, obviously, but Jaren Jackson Jr. is very good. They traded away Desmond Bain, so obviously once you did that, think the thought process from all of us is, okay, they're going to build around Ja, they're going to build around Triple J, and then see where they go from there.
Yeah.
So no real issues with that. Again, he's not everybody's cup of tea because he is a big that's not like a great rebounder, but he fits well with Ja, block shots, hits open threes. Now he's expanded his game inside the arc. Now he's a better post player, although he didn't play that well for Memphis in the playoffs, to be honest, right? Alex Caruso did a pretty good job guarding him. But no issues with that because obviously if you're the Grizzlies, you're not going to let him walk. And why not get it done now to avoid any real drama going into next season?
Yeah, I have no problems with it. Yeah, it's a lot of money, but I think it'll be worth it in the long run because, hopefully he has a lot of room to improve on the offensive end because we already know what a monster he is on the defensive end.
Yeah, so again, that's something that I think we kind of expected. I mean, it wasn't as reported as much, but obviously when that stuff was first going on, right, there was talks about like, yeah, they're gonna commit to those guys, and now you got Ja on that big max deal. He ended up not getting the super max, right, because he didn't make All NBA the year where he had that suspension stuff going on. So
Yep.
he's not making quite as much as he could, although it's still a decent amount. And then obviously 5 years, 240 million. I mean, if you're doing the
Sheesh.
math on that, yeah, I mean, if you're doing the math on that, that's like 50 million a year. So
Sheesh.
yeah, that's a lot. So I'm curious to see how good Memphis will be next year. I mean, they won 48 games last season. They started the year off really good. They were a top 3 seed for most of the year, and then the second half of the year post All-Star break, they just fell off. The defense fell apart. Ja was kind of in and out of the lineup. And, in the earlier part of the season, he kind of played below what we kind of have seen him play. He played better the second half of the year. He just struggled to be healthy. And then, by the end of it, they fired the coach, and then they just looked kind of like they were just done. And then they got demolished by Oklahoma City. Although they had a couple of close games, but still.
Yeah.
So I guess if you're Memphis, what do you think of the team going into next season? How do you feel about this new-ish kind of iteration of the Memphis Grizzlies?
Not
Where
good.
now no more Desmond Bane.
Not good, but not horrible, right? Like I think I'm middling on it because you lost Desmond Bane, so you did lose a lot of offensive production, but you did get slightly deeper. You are taking a flyer on, a guy like KCP. Maybe his production looks better, on a team like Memphis, but you have Cole Anthony as well, who gives you a bit of like flair, I guess, coming off the bench, right? And I mean, you do have that with Scottie Pippen Jr. as well. So, I'm not sure, how they look come playoff time, but at the very least, I think you feel pretty good about the future, right? You have a bunch of first round picks that you acquired by giving up, a guy who, may not really have like fit exactly what you were looking for, right? Because I think your primary duo and your primary focus of the team should be, Ja Morant and Triple J.
Yeah, exactly. That's kind of where I land is
Yeah.
that they'll probably be a decent team. I don't think they're going to be a which again, that's a very high bar. I don't think they'll be a championship team, but I don't think they're going to be like a horrific team that's, not really going to be meaningful in any way. I think, the Grizzlies clearly view Ja as a franchise guy. They really like him. I think the city really likes him. So not really an issue there. You can't, and there's no point in completely blowing it up because I mean, that could take a while, and what's the odds that you're going to get somebody as good as those guys anytime soon? You never know. So I don't really have a problem with what they're doing. I'm just curious to see how they build around it. But obviously, we're going to have to also see, some of we got another thing. So Santi Aldama from Shams Charania, he's agreed to a 3-year, $52.5 million deal with the Grizzlies. So that's another guy that the Grizzlies are going to pay. So no more Desmond Bane, but the roster will still down the line be pretty expensive. But he had a really good year last year, honestly. Like there were a lot of games where he was playing at a really high level. I mean, 52 for 3 years. I mean, that's about 18 or so a year. So
Yeah,
that's
not
more
horrible.
than the MLE. Yeah, that's more than the MLE. So if that's the case, right, then yeah, no other team was going to be able to get him.
Yeah. I'm not mad at it though. I think it's a good signing, right? You got to retain your depth somehow, some way.
Yeah. So, and according to Keith Smith, he says The Jaren Jackson Jr. news means that the Memphis Grizzlies will be a cap space team this offseason. In order to get Jackson his reported deal, the Grizzlies will need to create about $18 million in cap space, and then they'll use the cap space to renegotiate and extend Jaren Jackson Jr. And then from there, they'll have the room exception to use in free agency. Okay, so I guess in order to clear the space, I guess that means somebody's going to have to move.
Yep.
Okay, so
Bye, Cole Anthony. I'm kidding. I don't know
fun.
who it's going to be.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, so I guess now you brought back Jaren Jackson Jr. and you brought back Santi Aldama. Again, like that's fine. You re-sign your key free agents. You know, some of those guys, like I don't think Luke Kennard will be back. He'll probably be on another team.
Right.
And then after that, maybe I could see that maybe they might find a way to dump like a John Conchar or somebody like that who's closer to the end of their rotation, who doesn't really fit in probably to their long-term deals. I know that's kind of a throwback name. I know Untamed, I think, mentioned, you know, he would bring up how he got the block on AD. But it is funny to see how Memphis has kind of changed, right? Because a few years ago, I remember the first year we did this podcast, they were one of the up and coming rising teams in the league, right? Because I think at the time they were a 2 seed, they won almost 60 games, and then the playoffs happen where they lose in the first round of the Lakers, right? Then Dylan Brooks is blamed, and then he's gone, and then since then they've kind of just gone downwards. I know Ja's been hurt, other guys have been hurt as well, but you know it's kind of tough. It's a different reality now, and it just is a reminder of how fast the NBA can change over time.
Yeah, you're not wrong about it. You know.
Yeah, because in addition to that, like we were also like, okay, Ja's in this top 10 range of players, and you know now if you look at most top 10 lists, most people don't have him there at all. If you know, I mean, at this point now, most people have him closer to like 20.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, so we'll see what happens with Memphis as they go on, but you know, clearly they've been busy, which you know again is fine. And like you said, it's kind of hard to say no to the package that they were getting for Desmond Bane, even though he is really good. You know, like you said, that's a lot of future flexibility in terms of your picks amongst everything else.
Yeah, man. I think
guess,
Memphis is set up in a good spot. They shouldn't be.
Yeah.
Bad.
Yeah. With the room exception, would you use that to get Ty Jerome?
Why not? Why not double down on all the guard depth? Why not? Because that's something that's clearly plagued this team is injuries. So, and you know, I guess we'd probably be banking on Ja to miss a little bit of time, not you know a bunch, but a little bit, and I think that could help. And postseason wise, I think you definitely need depth. We saw that throughout the postseason.
Yeah, I agree with that. So you know, we'll see what happens in terms of what Memphis does. But either way, what do you think of? I guess also, what do you think of Jaren Jackson Jr. as a player? Like, do you view him as a guy that can be like a number 2 on a really really good team, or are you kind of not like low on him, but maybe not as high on him as some others? Where do you stand with him?
I think he could be a number 2. I just think the team needs to be built a little bit better, right? You got to be elite. I think in a couple other areas, right? You need that elite wing. You need probably, you know, a big as well that could potentially, you know, do a little bit more on the rebounding aspect of things, right? More of a true big than Jaren Jackson Jr., you know, playing the 5. And obviously, Ja needs to be amazing, right? Like, Ja needs to live up to his full potential. So I think it's doable. Everybody around him kind of just needs to get to their full potential as well. That's kind of where I stand on Memphis.
Yeah.
Do you think he could be a number 2, or are you just not it? Like you're just like, no, can't be. Fraud.
No, I don't think he's a fraud. I think number 2 may be a little bit tough.
Okay.
Fair. But I mean, like, can he be like a core part of a contending team? Yeah, sure, absolutely. Number 2 may be a little bit tough, but in fairness, again, they were very, very good, and he was for a while this season. He was their best player, and they were still winning a ton of games, right? And then you know, and then they kind of fell apart, and then eventually he got hurt for a little bit as well. So I mean, on this team, if he's like your second best guy, like I mean, they'll probably be, you know, a 45 to 48 win team or something like that, right? If you know, assuming decent health, they're still gonna have to wait for Zach Edey to come back and be healthy, but so far I've liked most of what they've done.
Yeah.
So can't really complain too much.
Mm-hmm.
So it is 6:25, and we still have not really had any real significant deals. What do we think is going on?
I think it's kind of like I just said earlier, right? Like, think of the quality of the free agency class. It's not the highest, right? So I think these teams are in absolutely no rush to get this done, right? Unless it's guys that, you'd potentially really want to bring back.
Yeah. And then most of the guys that are coming back, by and large, have already re-signed. So
Exactly.
yeah, so we'll see what happens. But yeah, it's pretty different from what I'm used to at the very least, and what you're used to, because we always remember long stretches where, well, at one time it would start at midnight or 12:01, and then you're up until like 2-3
Mm-hmm.
waiting for these signings, and then you got a bunch of them coming out right there and then. Then the last few years, right, we did have, because we've done this free agency stream a couple of times, right? Because we've done it each year that we've done this podcast, and again, if going back, we had, some guys come out like right away. Now, I don't think last year's free agency class was too crazy either, if I'm not mistaken, right?
No, it was not.
Yeah, so because last year, well, and then we had the other year where it was like Fred VanVleet was like one of the top free agents.
Yep.
Yeah, so we haven't had, I think since we've done the podcast, we haven't really had a free agency class that's been loaded with a ton of high end talent. It's nowadays, it's a lot of like what you see with Jaren Jackson Jr., where it's guys just kind of getting extensions and whatnot, as opposed to in the past where, a guy will enter free agency and then they'll do whatever. But, again, like in theory, not a lot of teams with cap space anyways. So some of these guys may have to do some work in order to get some movement going anyways.
Yep.
Yeah, so it is 6:27. We still haven't really had any real significant signings, so I guess we can just talk about maybe some of the other signings that we have. What signings in terms of the renegotiations have you liked so far, where you're like, this is a really good deal for player X or player Y or whatever?
Naz Reid
Mm-hmm.
and Jabari Smith Jr. for sure. Those are the two that I'm probably the highest on, right? Jabari Smith Jr., you lock up a lot of young talent. And that's a guy I think who has a ton of potential, room to grow for sure, especially now that you signed Kevin Durant. The floor spacing is going to be amazing. I think both parties are going to benefit from this very well, especially in year one. I think it's going to be an awesome, run that they're going to have this year for sure, as long as everybody stays healthy and, barring no changes. But that's the one that I really like. And then obviously Minnesota, you love to get Naz Reid back on the team, but actually at a bargain, right? Because I think, he probably deserves more money, but at the end of the day, they're able to kind of keep him in that 6-man role, and he's still so crucial to their offense and defense now. So, shout out to him as well. I think those are probably my top two signings that I've seen so far.
Yeah, I would. Yeah, I would agree with that. Because again, like with a guy like Naz Reid, you're not paying him 30 plus million a year now, right? Like it starts. I think the first year starts at like 20, 21 million, and I think that's a really good deal for a guy like that. And again, this is 1 year of free agency where not a lot of teams with cap space, not a lot of crazy options out there, and so maybe this version of this year's free agency is just kind of like you're not going to see, like the wild $30 million a year for guys that are kind of like, like in the upper middle tier, right? Like you might see, like, where you may have seen that, like, I don't know, handful of years ago.
Yeah.
But you don't want to make any proclamations about that right now. So we'll see. Were there any re-signings where you were kind of, not that you didn't like it, but maybe you felt kind of iffy about the contract?
Harden, kind of,
Mm-hmm.
because I think it's a lot of money, 40 million in a year, right? That's what it's about, right? 40 and a half or
Yeah,
something like
2
that.
years, 81 million.
Yeah, so that's kind of a lot of money, I think, to commit to a guy for 2 years. But your hands are tied. What could you have realistically done that would have been, an upgrade?
Yeah.
But I
Here
don't
we
know.
go. We got from Shams Charania. We did get 4 years, 53 million for Dorian Finney-Smith, so they were able to poach him from the Los Angeles Lakers. So now he's going to go to Houston. I'm curious to see, with the forward depth that they have, where, the allocations of his minutes will be, but he's a vet, right? We just saw his impact that he made with the Lakers this past season, right after he was traded there, right? He had one of the highest plus minuses on the team. And, now he's going to a team in Houston. I think he's from Texas, if I'm not mistaken. That's what everybody's kind of been saying. So he has, a real chance to go on a team where he's still going to play, still going to get minutes. He's going to compete potentially for a title, and it's a 4-year deal. I don't actually think that the Lakers would have given him a 4-year deal. I think that, they may have been willing to give him 2 or 3, because if they were willing to give him a 4-year deal, he'd still be a Laker.
Right. You're right. Yeah, I think
Yeah.
I like it for Houston, though. Gives you more wing depth for sure. I would probably expect him to fit in between like Tari Eason's minutes and, somebody else's, right?
Yeah. And it looks like Shams Charania also put out that Paul Reed has signed a 2-year, $11 million deal to return to the Detroit Pistons.
All right, not bad.
Yeah. So I know with Detroit, they're kind of in a weird spot right now with the Malik Beasley situation, and it's possible also Hardaway might leave, and I think who's Dennis Schroeder may leave as well, so they may end up having like a decent amount of cap to just kind of use on different guys. But back to the DFS thing, and that somewhat potentially ties into the LeBron scenario, right? Just because, like, if they're not going to do some of these type of things, right, then that may have kind of set them off potentially. I don't know, but either way, like I said, it feels like that the Lakers are in the era of trying to prioritize Luka. And now it's funny because Dorian Finney-Smith has a really good relationship with Luka. I think he also has a good relationship with Durant, if I'm not mistaken. I think I remember hearing that when he was traded to Brooklyn in that Dallas deal, right? When it was like Spencer Dinwiddie. Yeah, I think I remember that as well. But, it's definitely a loss for the Lakers because he was one of their better 3-and-D forwards. He's not really as much of a 3 anymore. He's more like a 4. But he was one of their, solid two-way guys, and he was a big part of, even though it didn't look like it as much in the playoffs, he was a big part of their defensive turnaround during the second half of the season when he got there. So now if you're the Lakers, you have to kind of find a way to find a potential replacement. Now, since Dorian Finney-Smith is gone, then that you would probably assume that means that they're going to have the full MLE, and then you kind of wonder, do they use that on DeAndre Ayton, assuming he comes over? I don't know if we'll get anything about that today, but if we do, right, do they use that on Ayton? If they don't get Ayton, do they split it up with multiple players? So I don't know. But it's definitely a loss for LA, and it looks like the Memphis Grizzlies and guard Cam Spencer have agreed to a 2-year, $4.5 million fully guaranteed deal, right? So I believe that's Pat Spencer's brother who resides in Golden State. I haven't seen as much of Cam Spencer though.
Yeah, he's all right. I mean, I don't think there's a whole lot to write home about on this one, but
yeah, and Keith Smith says that Dorian Finney-Smith did not get the full non-taxpayer MLE from the Rockets in his new deal. He left some of it on the table. So if he left some of it on the table, the Rockets could use that for something else.
Wow. Man, the Houston situation just keeps getting better and better.
And it's kind of funny how fast and how quickly things in the NBA change, because not to keep bringing it up, but the first year we did this podcast, right, Houston was kind of in the stretch where they were looked at as kind of a joke, right? Like I remember we had a couple of guests on this podcast where we were talking about Houston and, things like, do they prioritize Şengün over Jalen Green? But, like there were no real veterans on the roster, right? Clearly there was like a level of, they had tuned out the previous coach, Steven Silas, right? But, then they signed Van Vliet and Dylan Brooks. Those were two signings that a lot of people were like, what are these guys doing? Giving these guys all that money. It kind of helped establish a little bit more professionalism there. Then they also brought in Ime Udoka, and now they, look. And then last year with those young guys and some vets, they looked like a good team. Like they won 52 games. They lost in the first round to Golden State, but that's okay. Now you go out and get a star in Kevin Durant. to, be one of your go-to guys at the end of games. And he can still help you out over the course of a game anyways. And, now they're trying to contend and potentially challenge Oklahoma City in the West. We'll see if they'll be able to do it, but clearly, they're going all in, right? Again, re-signing most of their key young guys, bringing in KD. Now they're bringing in Dorian Finney-Smith. They've had a great offseason. They're already probably one of the biggest winners of the offseason.
Yeah, I would agree with you 100%. What a off season for them. I will be right back and grab some water, but you can hold it down real quick.
Yeah, sure. So I guess, if we look at Dorian Finney-Smith, so let's see. So 4 years, 53 million. I guess, if we're gonna do the math, that's like it's a little less than 14 million. It's like a little over 13. So I don't know how much more that they'll have left to use. Like I said, it gives them a little bit more flexibility, but again, I'm curious to see where the Lakers pivot after losing DFS. Like I said, maybe they're gonna probably use it for Ayton, but if you're Houston again, it's a great signing. Continues to help them. Another professional guy. He's not going to try to do too much, and they have a lot of athletes, so I think he can even, not necessarily on the offensive end, but I don't think he'll be quite as overtaxed in Houston as he was in LA. So if I'm Houston, I think you got to feel really good about everything that they've done so far this summer. And this is kind of what we were hoping for, like from a Houston perspective, right? You were kind of hoping for the continued progression, the continued building of a team that's gone from a young team with not a whole lot to lose to, now they're going to be a team that's going to have real expectations on them. And I'm very curious to see where Houston goes from here. I think they're still good. Yeah, they're going to be one of the best teams in the Western Conference. We'll see if they can contend. And like I said, challenge Oklahoma City, but they at least have a chance. They're going to be, up. They're going to be up there in terms of they should still be one of the top seeds in the Western Conference. And, I think now they can go toe-to-toe with a lot of these other teams. Because Oklahoma City, I would say, is still the top of the Western Conference. But, the gap between 2 and then all the way down to 7, 8, whatever you want to do, that gap is not quite as wide. So the door is open for another team where, yeah, Houston now can make a realistic push for the conference finals. Maybe if everything goes right, maybe they could end up in the NBA finals. It's kind of hard for me to go quite there just because of how good Oklahoma City is. But now you can realistically feel good about their chances of winning a playoff series, where I think last year, I know some people picked the Rockets to win, but I think a lot more would have had to have gone their way. And they did take Golden State to 7 for whatever it's worth. But now Houston clearly has gotten better. So, so now they're going to move, I think, closer to the Denver, Minnesota tier. So again, I think if you're a Houston fan, you got to be pretty pleased with all the moves that they've made so far. So moving on, let's see if Shams has put anything out. And it looks like let's see. So it looks like the Memphis Grizzlies and Cole Anthony's reps at XL Sports are working towards a resolution that allows Memphis to create the necessary cap space. So does that mean he's going to get traded or bought out? Let me refresh and let's see what Shams has to say. Okay, so that is the post. So, and so in other words, what Yarby said about Cole Anthony may actually be correct. So I don't know if that means that he's going to get bought out or if he's going to get traded. What? I don't know if that means that he's going to get bought out or traded, but kind of funny how that works. So we'll give it some time and we'll see what ends up happening with this one. Let's see. So now, and if that's the case, then yeah, that's how Memphis is going to create the cap space necessary to be able to renegotiate and re-sign and extend Jaren Jackson Jr. And again, you kind of think about it, and it's like, yeah, you have Scottie Pippen Jr. So it's like, how much do you really need Cole Anthony? I mean, I know they're different players; they're not necessarily the same, but obviously you have to prioritize Jaren Jackson Jr. So just kind of the cost of doing business. So yeah, according to Bobby Marks, now Lakers have access to the 14.1 non-tax mid-level and 5.1 million biannual exception. So they could potentially sign, somebody with the full MLE and then or split it and then sign somebody with the biannual exception. I think their last biannual exception, if I'm not mistaken, was Torian Prince. I think is who that was. So, moving on.
Sorry, I have to use the bathroom as well, but I just checked my phone and there's no way I was right
Yep.
about Cole Anthony.
Yeah, you were. I was laughing about. I was
Okay,
laughing about that.
I'll be right back.
Where? All right. Yeah, Grizzlies working towards resolution to allow Cole Anthony to find next destination. So I don't know how that's. I don't know if that means that that's a buyout or if that's like just them trading him. Because if they're gonna need to create the cap space, they can't really take the salaries back. So maybe that means they're just gonna dump him to another team. Let me check out and see if Keith Smith has mentioned anything. He's kind of the one of the front office cap gurus around the NBA. Yeah, so nothing yet. But but I guess yeah, I don't know. So either it might be a buyout if it's working towards a but I'm not sure because like I said, in order to create the cap space, they would have to not take anything back. So, we'll see if there's anything that happens with that situation and if there's a resolution to it. But I think that means he's probably going to get traded. Okay, so let's see what we see. So and then Shams, of course, he just put out a tweet. This means the playmaking and scoring guard is entering the marketplace. So I guess he knew that people were confused, and so he needed to put out clarifications. So that's kind of funny. So pretty quiet as of right now. Nothing really has happened that we didn't really expect, in fairness. But yeah, so but so moving on, for going back, I'm I'm still kind of waiting to see if there's going to be anything regarding uh some of the other bigs because you kind of wonder since there's been so much reporting and discussions about them, maybe that means that there may be a resolution soon. But kind of like Yarby said, it's possible that a lot of these guys, they don't really need to rush in order to make a move. And so maybe we're just going to have a slower paced free agency than we normally do. But I do wonder, I guess if you're a team that's interested I guess I am curious what teams would specifically be interested in acquiring a guy like a Cole Anthony. And but I guess it would have to be a team that's that has something where okay, we can just give you a guy that you can just waive or we can just absorb him into our trade exception or something like that. So see. But I guess it's pretty clear, yeah, Cole Anthony's not going to be a Grizzly for much longer. Let's see. So yeah, so right now that's kind of the last guy that's kind of the last. All right, so here we go. Jake LaRavia, a 2-year, $12 million deal with the Lakers. So there you go. That's the Lakers' first free agency signing is Jake LaRavia. So, this is a guy who played for the Sacramento Kings and the Memphis Grizzlies. I believe the Grizzlies were the team that drafted him, and he had some decent production in Memphis, and then he was traded to traded to Sacramento. This year, in across the two teams, he averaged 7 a game, 4 rebounds, mainly an offensive minded forward. So I guess he's a guy that can help with some scoring. Oh, now that's interesting. So Shams Charania and Chris Haynes put out 2 separate things. Now this is the first time I've ever seen anything like this. I've never seen anything like this before. Oh! Yeah, so what the heck? I've never seen anything like that before. So who's right? Who's right? Is it Chris Haynes that's right, or is it Shams Charania that's right? Because they can't both be right. That's weird. What the heck? I've not seen anything like this before. But I don't. Okay. Okay, so Chris Haynes deleted it. Okay, and then Dan Wojcicki confirmed it. Okay, so he is he is going to the Lakers. So Chris Haynes got it wrong, unfortunately for him. But yeah, so I already talked about LaRavia, and he is, a scoring forward. I think he's got a relationship with Reeves because I saw an interview with Austin Reeves where he was kind of talking, and I think he was in the car and he was talking and discussing stuff with Jake LaRavia. So I guess that's the very different player from Dorian Finney-Smith. So that was odd. Yeah, that's one of the most bizarre situations that I've seen where two people reported two different things. I'm yeah, so Shams Charania and Dan Wojcicki reported that. So and then he just edited it. He just edited his tweet. So since he edited his tweet, okay, I think that means he's going to LA. Okay, so there we go. So that finally confirms it. So that was kind of one of the most random situations that I've seen. Pretty funny. Again, I don't. It's not to me personally. It's not like the most pressing need, I would say. We'll see what he does as a Laker. I mean, again, he can shoot. I remember on Memphis, he had some games where he just absolutely torched them. That seems to be a reoccurring theme that I've seen with the Lakers many times, where they end up bringing in guys who just absolutely roast their team. But I don't know where this is coming from. I don't know if it's a portion of the MLE. It's not. It's not the biannual because it's more than the biannual. So, yeah, I don't know. I don't know. Let's ask Yarby. Let's see what he thinks.
What's the question?
So, as you already know, the Cole Anthony thing happened, and they're looking to trade him and dump him. But we just got word from Shams Charania. It was about Jake LaRavia. So it was funny. You had Chris Haynes say that he was going to the Kings, and then Shams Charania said he was going to the Lakers. Okay. So then you had a stretch for about a couple of minutes where we didn't know which one was right. And so Chris Haynes, he had to edit and fix his tweet So now we know. And then Dan Wojcicki of the LA Times, no, he's with the Athletic. I think he left the LA Times. He confirmed it. So now Jake LaRavia, 2-year, $12 million deal to the Lakers. So
Jake LaRavia to the Lakers.
yeah, I guess that's your Dorian Finney-Smith replacement.
Ooh.
So you got it. So I kind of want you to also break down, because you just talked about, hey, you might want him as a Wizard. So I guess you can kind of also add some additional thought process in terms of like his game, how you feel about him as a signing for this team. Didn't really expect it at all. I was saying while you were gone, I remember, I think on one of the Lakers content creator pages, I think it was Laker Nation, they were doing an interview with Austin. I think it was they were either doing an interview with LaRavia or Austin Reeves, and they were both in the car together at one point. And like they didn't, and like initially you didn't see who was the other seat in the car. So I guess they must have a pretty good relationship. So I don't know, maybe this is one of those tampering things. What do you think?
I think it's my initial reaction. I was like, ugh, but now I think I'm like, okay, hang on, because during that 23-24 season is when he was decent, right? Like he was putting up 10 a game on, decent efficiency, whatever. And then I think the following year he wasn't horrible either. The efficiency definitely went up for sure. So I mean, and he's young. He's 23. So I guess you are prioritizing youth there, but he's gonna have to step up big time.
Yeah. So. Yeah, fully guaranteed, 2 years, $12 million. All right, so I was able to find it, and so it was on the NBA front office show, and they did a 30-minute interview with Jake LaRavia, and he was in the car as a passenger, and then the person driving the car was Austin Reeves. So, like I said, maybe they have, I'm going to assume they have a prior relationship with one another. But yeah, so that's, I guess, their first free agency signing.
Okay. Can't be mad at it.
And I guess, yeah, so we'll see what he does as a Laker. Again, if you haven't seen much of him, like I said, he played for the Grizzlies, he played for the Kings. I think when he was a Grizzly, they didn't give him the normal type of rookie deal. So I think they declined his team option. So the year that he was playing really well, they had to trade him because he would have just walked for nothing.
Yep.
And then that's how I think he ended up on the Sacramento Kings, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so there you go. Yeah, negotiated tonight by agents Aaron Riley and Reggie Berry of AMR Agency.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so we'll see. Yeah, so, it's a signing. Again, it's a guy where if he pans out, that could be a really good signing. And then if not, then you're kind of like, it's whatever, because it's not really that much money. But like you said, it's very clear that the Lakers are prioritizing youth, at least as of right now, because like you said, he's 23. And prioritizing youth while potentially signing Brook Lopez, I don't know.
Yeah, we'll do that. They should not do that.
Yeah, because because Bobby Marks put out that they have the full MLE and then they have the biannual exception. So one of those, I'm going to assume it's got to be the MLE because that's more than the MLE. That's more than the biannual exception.
Yep.
So I guess part of the MLE is going to be used to sign LaRavia. Then I guess you have the remainder to do whatever with it.
Yeah.
Whether or not it's Ayton, whether or not it's Lopez, Capella, I don't know.
I'm not mad at it. I think
it was clear direction. It was just funny how, again, both of those guys, right? One had the Lakers and then the other had the Kings. So then I was like, okay, maybe he accidentally mistyped it. We don't know. It was just kind of, like I said, it was confusing for a couple minutes.
Yeah,
and it was like, well, it's like, which one do you trust? Which one is correct? And, so we'll see. But I would imagine that they would probably ideally have to do a little bit more than that.
Oh, yeah. That can't be the end. No.
No, I know. I was just saying. It was just I'm just curious to see what they do with the remainder of their MLE.
Yeah.
So, I guess the question is, let's see. No to Lopez. Keith Wells is in the chat. No to Lopez. I'm assuming he's talking about the Lakers.
Yeah, that'd be horrible.
Is there a team that you actually would like for him to be on?
Nope.
Well, we know he can't be out of the league
Yeah, he
because
can.
he's still good.
Yeah, he
He's still
can.
good enough. He's still good enough on it to be on an NBA roster. I guess you're kind of thinking like he can't start on a team.
No,
Is there a team where like you'd be okay with him as a backup?
I don't know, man. That's tough because, yeah, exactly. I second that. Keith Wells, bum. I agree. I mean,
Yeah.
like
I wonder
during the
what-
regular season, I'm sure like
Yeah.
he could be useful to somebody as
Yeah.
a rotational piece, but come playoff time, he can't touch the floor.
Yeah.
You saw it.
Yeah. Yeah, sure. I guess if Keith Wells, if you're listening to this, you're a Lakers fan. So what do you think of the Jake LaRavia signing? Are you a fan or not a fan? I'm kind of curious to hear because I think when he did that interview, I think there were a lot of people who liked it. I don't know if there's as many people that actually know as much about his game. Like I said, I've seen multiple games where when they played the Grizzlies, where he just completely torched them, and I've seen that as a reoccurring theme. I feel like a handful of times where I've seen the Lakers either be interested in or sign guys that have routinely just torched their team. But we'll see what happens with that one. But it's just kind of a funny thread to kind of go across. Do you think that this signing never heard of him? Do you think that this signing takes him out of the Ayton business?
It could. If it does, then if their plan is Jake LaRavia and Brooke Lopez, I see why LeBron wants to request a trade. And I'm not lying to you. I'm serious. That's bad motion, man. You got to come on. You got to take a swing at the best available, right? Like at least try and go for Clint, Ayton, or somebody else. But that can't be the be all end all here for the Lakers. If it is, that's disappointing.
That's
It's bad, man.
Oh man, that's funny. But again, like I said, because some of the articles that I was reading, it kind of almost suggested that they're kind of at this point potentially where they're not really consulting him on moves, they're not really involving him in a lot of stuff, and they're not really prioritizing him anymore, right? Where it's like now you're not the center of how we're gonna rebuild and how we're gonna build out our roster. But so I guess if you're LA, right, and you're looking at this Jake LaRavia signing, what are you trying to get out of him? What are you hoping that he's going to do for your team?
3-and-D. I mean, I think it would come down to that. He proved that he could be, a solid shooter, in Sacramento, and I believe his last 2 years in Memphis. So, yeah, I mean, as long as he's hitting 40% from the three and not, getting ran off the floor, I think you'll be okay with that, right?
Yeah, and I think we saw him in the summer league. I think when we went to Vegas,
Yeah,
a few years ago, he did not really look that great in the summer
very
league.
polarizing player. People are not high on him.
Yeah, when I saw him in the summer league, and when you saw him in the summer league, I think we were not all that enthused. But in fairness, he got better. So he's gotten better to a point where I do think he is like a real rotational piece. Is he like a top 5 player in your rotation? I would say no. I think he's probably closer to like 7, 8, somewhere around that
7 to
range.
10.
Yeah. So for $6 million a year, not really that big of a deal. I mean, again, like worst case scenario, if it doesn't pan out and he stinks, it's 2 years, it's $6 million a year. That's pretty much nothing in today's NBA.
Yeah.
Like I think that's a perfectly fine deal, but we'll see. Because again, in fairness to LA, right? I know people have criticized a lot of the moves that they've made. One of the things that they normally have done a good job of is finding these young players and kind of getting whatever the best you can out of them is. Like they have done a good job of that. Like the scouting department is one of the better aspects of their team, even though there's other parts that are lacking. So, like if you're a Laker fan, give him a chance. We'll see what he does. Like I said, I'm sure there's going to be people all over the place with that one because there's probably, like you said, a lot of people who haven't completely heard of him.
Yeah.
So
it's going to be interesting. I'm sure Laker Nation is eating this one up. Jeez.
Yeah. So now it is 7 o'clock. We are 1 hour basically into this, and we have not really Oh, here we go. As soon as I say it. Trey Jones, 3-year, $24 million deal to return to the Chicago Bulls. Former Spur, right? Former Spurs. So now he was moved to Chicago in that I think it was the Levine deal, right? Where it was like him going to Chicago. You had Zach, the big man, Zach Collins going to Chicago. Then Levine went to Sacramento from Chicago. Fox went to the Spurs. So I believe he was in that deal. 3 years, 24 million. I mean, 3 years is a decent length of a contract, but 8 million a year, not that big of a deal. I suppose it's a movable contract down the line. And I guess with Lonzo Ball being moved, I guess now maybe Trey Jones can be your backup point guard, right? Then you just gotta wait for them to, I guess, break out the bank for Josh Giddey, right?
Yeah.
Who they traded for him, and he had a good second half of the season for them. So I guess do you like him as a Lonzo Ball replacement in Chicago, probably as a backup point guard?
I mean, he's not horrible. I think he's a little bit of a downgrade from Lonzo, but it's still accept.
Smaller.
Yeah, it's still acceptable, right? He's one of those guys that makes the right play. Brother of Tyus Jones, if people don't know. So, good sense, good feel for the game, just very limited in terms of what he can physically do because of his size. But, if the shot is falling on a good night, then I think you're going to get a good, game or good stretch from him, right? But outside of that, he's not like a lockdown defender or anything like that, but he knows how to run the offense, and I think that's all you could really need from a point guard.
Yeah, exactly. And again, it's always helpful to have guys, who can help set the table for a team. And again, probably not that many other great options that they would have had out there. So, you might as well just re-sign them to a relatively cheap deal and just kind of roll with it
Yeah.
from here on out. So moving on, 702. I guess. Oh, here we go. From Shams Charania, D'Angelo Russell has agreed on a 2-year, $13 million deal with the Dallas Mavericks. This was a deal that had kind of already been hinted at in air quotes, right? This was something that had already been kind of talked about. We knew that the Mavs were looking for a backup point guard, or at the very least, worst case scenario, somebody who can help run the offense and do some stuff while Kyrie's out, because we know they re-signed Kyrie Irving. Not really mad at it. I mean, 2 years, $13 million. So you're talking $6-7 million. So, which is funny because when he was a Laker, when they first traded for him, he was on like a max deal. He was like a $30 million guy. And so now he's basically an exception level player now at this point, because he's really not really a starting point guard on a really good team. But again, for Dallas, right, he's not Kyrie Irving, but while Kyrie's out, he can probably help put up some numbers. He's already played with Anthony Davis before and did a pretty good job and fit well there. You got some bigs, you got some guys defensively that can help him out. So no real issues with that one. And it's only 2 years.
Yeah. You can't hate on that one at all, like you said. You've got tons of room to grow, tons of flexibility, and that team I think is one to watch for sure. And Kyrie's going to be out. And D'Lo, I think, can give you some of that production, right? He can give you that offense. He's a knockdown shooter. Can make the right pass as well. So kind of just looking forward to seeing him, back with AD, because I think that was kind of an underrated, duo, I think, during their time in LA. I thought the fit between Anthony Davis and, D'Angelo Russell wasn't horrible at all. I think, obviously D'Lo would get picked on, and, he's not a defender by any means, but still pretty cool to, I guess, have that duo reunited. And I think it's a great quick fix for the Kyrie situation.
Yeah. And so, Yossi Goslin, right? It sounds like, so he's another cap guy, and so he said that the Lakers would have 8.3 million remaining of their non-taxpayer MLE if Jake LaRavia signed with it, which he's probably going to get signed with it. So, so I think Ayton, what he gave up, I think he gave up, what was it, like 10 million or whatever. So so basically it's not that far from the full MLE. But either way, going back to the D'Lo thing. Again, is he a guy that's a starting point guard on a contender? No. But, for a team without Kyrie Irving, he can probably at least help right there and then. And then, Kyrie comes back, probably a backup. And then, you kind of just go from there. But like you said, Dallas is a team to watch. I don't necessarily know if I can trust that they're going to be one of the best teams in the Western Conference. I mean, again, they're going to have Kyrie probably come back earlier than anticipated. And then you need everyone else like AD and others to be healthy. And then you probably need Cooper Flagg to be really good right out of the gates, which I think most of us feel like he probably will be. So they're going to be in the mix. I don't know if their ceiling is probably going to be quite as high as it was before, before they did all of this stuff. But, either way, I don't have a real issue with their roster. It is a bizarre one, right? And I think that there's going to, like I said, there's going to have to be things that are going to have to go their way. But this isn't the worst case scenario. It's not the Sacramento Kings, that's for sure, right? Where now it feels like that team is a complete disaster, complete mess. And again, Dallas got lucky because they got the number 1 pick. And you need luck sometimes to kind of be able to get out of bad situations. D'Lo, good short-term move. Yeah, that's kind of how you have to look at it.
Yep, quick fix.
Yeah, quick fix. Again, not the long-term solution.
Whoa. Sorry.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Michael Porter Jr. has been traded.
To the Brooklyn Nets for Cam Johnson.
Okay.
Oh, wow. So that's kind of our first this came out of nowhere type deal. So the Denver Nuggets, and this is actually a deal, funny enough, that I believe I did on 2K a couple days ago. Don't know why I did it, but now I guess I know why I did it. So the Denver Nuggets are trading Michael Porter Jr. and an unprotected 2032 first-round pick to the Brooklyn Nets for Cam Johnson. I guess if you're the Denver Nuggets, Cam Johnson makes less money. So you do save money, I believe, if you're the Denver Nuggets. And for Brooklyn, I'm going to assume, because they have a decent amount of cap space, so they'll probably absorb some of that into their cap space. That would probably also make Denver cheaper, and maybe that might help them get closer to whatever MLE that they need. So maybe that might allow them to make a second move. But I think we both kind of felt like, okay, Denver probably is going to have to do something. It's not that they're bad, because they took Oklahoma City to 7 games, right? But there probably was still a ceiling to how good that team was realistically going to be. Now you got Cam Johnson, where, again, he's a different player from Michael Porter Jr., but he can do some of the same stuff, at least as a three-point shooter. He's not quite as long, right? He's not 6'10". He's what, like 6'8" or so. But, he's still a wing that can, as a shooter, still play off of a guy like Jokic. He can, handoffs, run off of screens. I think he's got a little bit, you wouldn't really want him handling the ball, but I think he's got a little bit more handle, a little bit more than Michael Porter Jr. I don't think he's quite as shaky with it. You don't really want him doing it, but I think he's better at that. And it looks like Ty Jerome has agreed to a 3-year, $28 million deal with the Grizzlies with a player option in year 3. So this was something that we talked about that was reported as being pretty likely. So I guess we'll start with the Nuggets deal. How do we feel? How do you feel about it?
I think it's great. Move on for Michael Porter Jr., a guy who's, was reliable and during the title year for sure. Definitely one of their biggest X factors, but ever since hasn't really, shown up, I think, in the way that you really wanted to. I think there were times when you could label him even as a ball stopper, right? And I think when you bring in a guy like Cam Johnson, you're kind of getting similar productivity without the negativity as well, like the downsides of Michael Porter Jr., right? But you do lose some of the potential because Michael Porter Jr. did have, a ton of potential to be more than just, a catch and shoot guy. But, with Cam Johnson, I think, you're bringing in a little bit more sense, right, to the whole thing, the whole operation.
I think it's probably a better within the team structure type fit. I guess, there's arguments about which guy is better. I mean, which guy do you think is better? Do you think Cam Johnson's a better player, or do you think Michael Porter Jr. is a better player?
Probably Michael Porter Jr., but I think the fit here in Denver, Cam Johnson fits way better.
Yeah. I would say that, because I think for Porter Jr., the highs are really high, but then the problem is the lows are really bad. And I don't know so maybe you don't get as many of the highs with Cam Johnson, but I don't think you get quite as many of the lows. And it's for not as much money. And I think we both said, coming off of the Denver loss to Oklahoma City, and we even said that going into last season, that chances are if Denver was going to do anything, they were going to have to move Michael Porter Jr. It's just they don't have the other mid-tier contracts to be able to, to really be able to do anything else. Like, you're not going to get anything for just Ignaji, and none of the other guys on the roster really make a lot of money. Right. So that's a guy that you kind of have to, so Michael Porter Jr. is kind of the odd man out. So, I mean, that one, again, I think that makes sense.
Yeah.
So, and now, again, with the new GM or front office in place, well, then there kind of probably has to be like a real case scenario where it's like, yeah, they're not going to be as wed to those guys as much. So Denver's going to look different, but Cam Johnson, not at all a bad player to grab, and again, the contract is a lot more manageable.
Yeah, exactly. Way better. It loosens them up a ton, flexibility wise. I love this for Denver.
Yeah, actually, to be honest, just because we can, let's actually kind of look at his contract so that way we can actually get like a more accurate
Sure thing.
portrayal of his. So I think it's a little bit. So I think Cam Johnson, if I'm not mistaken, I'm pretty sure he signed that big $100 million deal or whatever it was with the Nets a couple years ago. So he's got, according to Hoops Hype, he's got 21 million for this upcoming season, and then 23 million for the season after that. So he's only got a couple seasons left. Spotrac, I think, is kind of lagging right now because I'm pretty sure anyone and everyone is on that. That's probably the best site to look at if you want to kind of look at a lot of the contracts and everything else to go along with it. But so in other words, yeah, Michael Porter Jr. is like a $40 million guy. So he's basically a max player. So you basically got off some salary. You did have to give up a first, but that's okay. And you got back a player of similar quality. And it looks like, according to Fred Katz, Dennis Schroeder is going to sign with the Kings.
Okay.
So that Zoom meeting must have gone really well. Because
Right.
that was probably less than an hour.
Right. True that.
Yeah, so I guess we'll get into let's talk about Ty Jerome, then we'll talk about Dennis Schroeder. So Ty Jerome, 3 years, 28 million with a player option in year 3. How do we like it? That's the guy that I think that's the reporting that was kind of coming in earlier today. And of course, they're going to have to move Cole Anthony, I think, in order to get it done, because I think they have to open up the cap space to renegotiate and re-sign Jaren Jackson Jr. and get the exception, or maybe they don't need it. I'm not sure, but they're going to have to move Cole Anthony. But what do you think?
I like it. I think at the end of the day, Ty Jerome is better than Cole Anthony, right? Maybe not in the postseason. Granted, both those guys aren't really noted as postseason performers, but throughout the regular season, I think you love what Ty Jerome can do on both ends of the floor. Mainly offense, right? His finishing is super elite, very sneaky in terms of his pull-up game, especially around the paint. So I like it a lot for Memphis, right? And it just bolsters up your backcourt, right? Because you have Ja, great superstar. You have Scottie Pippen Jr. coming off the bench. And then you also have now Ty Jerome. And I think that's a better fit than Cole Anthony. Like, earlier we were talking about it. It gives you, like, Cole Anthony gave you the flair, but I think Ty Jerome is going to give you the productivity that you really want. And that's at a bargain as well. So can't really hate on it.
Yeah. And it looks like the Nuggets are saving 17 million with the Cam Johnson move. So, yeah, Ty Jerome in the regular season for the Cavs, 12.5 points, 3 assists, a steal. Basically almost a 50-40-90 season, right? Again, not crazy shot attempts, but just as a whole, he was a big part of the Cavs' success last year. Then in the playoffs, pretty rough dip, especially in terms of the efficiency. He had some pretty awful games, mainly against Indiana. I think against the Heat, his numbers were fine. He actually had some pretty good games against Miami where you're like, oh, it looks like maybe his offensive production might actually translate in the playoffs. But it's like, nope, it was against the Miami Heat, who, actually in the regular season, they were a good defensive team, but as a whole, not like a great team. And then against the Pacers, who were closer to being a really good team. I mean, they were in the finals and were a game away from potentially winning it. Yeah, that didn't work out for him. And then Kevin Porter Jr., a 2-year, $11 million deal to return to the Milwaukee Bucks. Averaged 12 and 4 while shooting 41% from 3 in 30 games for the Bucks. So again, he played well for the Bucks after they traded for him. Probably going to be their backup point. He might start with Lillard out, honestly, and kind of be, one of their offensive guys. And he shot the ball well. He's a decent athlete. So nothing really wrong with that, and pretty inexpensive deal. What do you think?
Yeah, I'm not mad at it. I'm really not mad at it. Yeah, I mean, it's fine. And what is it?
2 years, 11 million.
2 year, 11 million. Yeah, I mean, like, that's pretty good, right? You're gonna get some productivity. You're gonna get some scoring. A lot of shots, volume shooter for sure. But that's kind of what they need, right? Because you're not going to have Dame throughout the majority of the season. So somebody's got to shoot, a lot of perimeter shots. Granted, I'm concerned that it's Kevin Porter Jr. and Kyle Kuzma next to Giannis, right? That doesn't really give me a whole lot of confidence, especially on the defensive end, right? How the heck is this team going to win a single game, right? Outside of Giannis, because if Giannis goes down, geez, I don't even want to know what would happen. But, I think the Kevin Porter Jr. thing is fine. I have no problems with that.
Yeah, and then now the Schroeder thing is from Fred Katz, right? Who's also an NBA guy. He's not Shams, right? So we could wait to see if Shams puts out anything. Although again, the Kings one was another one that was like D'Lo, where there was a decent amount of reporting before it happened. So I think there's a pretty good chance that that's what's going to happen if he goes to the Kings, assuming he goes there. How do you feel about that signing? If you're, what do you think of it?
I mean, it'd be okay. You finally get your point guard. If you're the Kings, right? They've been kind of longing for that ever since Fox was traded, right? They never really got a guard back, at least a true point guard. So, what's up?
Oh, so now Shams is putting out that Bruce Brown Jr. is going back to the Denver Nuggets for a 1-year deal. So
called it.
That's something that we talked about that we thought would probably happen in our latest episode that came out just a few hours ago. So if you're Denver, you did a pretty good job. You turned Michael Porter Jr. into Cam Johnson. I'm gonna assume, I don't know the terms of the contracts, but you could probably assume that maybe helps financially allow them to bring in Bruce Brown. I don't know what his contract is, if it's a minimum or an exception level money or not, but pretty good work by Denver because, again, Cam Johnson, the gap between him and Michael Porter Jr. isn't that big. And then you get Bruce Brown, who was great for Denver when he last played there. So they're doing some work, right, to try to, continue to compete and contend. So good job so far.
Yep. I love it.
Yeah. So the good news is that now we're in a stretch where now we are getting signings, for the most part, pretty consistently now. So it seems like we're kind of in a rhythm. We're kind of in a groove. It'll probably slow down at some point, but now, we're starting to get some more guys come out. So we'll see, if Ayton signs at any point, or if there's, an Ayton radar or anything.
Right.
And we may not, and again, the wording may have to be a little bit different because he's not cleared waivers yet. So yeah, Shams Charania, almost 1.5 hours into free agency. The Nuggets land Cam Johnson via trade for Michael Porter Jr. and bring back a fan favorite and do it all forward in Bruce Brown Jr. So I guess he already played for Denver, but I guess, reiterate, some of the value of the Nuggets being able to get him back, assuming that he can be somewhat similar to what he was a couple seasons ago when he won't help win the title with them.
Very solid defender, right? Very do-it-all defensive guy. Can rebound, get on the boards very easily. Can also play make as well. Very good passer, right? Use him in the, the short pick and roll, high pick and roll as well. And he can kind of just find open shooters similar to what Jokic can do. And also the cool part is during the Denver tenure, I think he did a good job in, hit corner threes and also kind of finding guys and being a cutter as well. So kind of playing off of Jokic, right? Kind of the ideal guy that you would want, if you're Jokic, right? A guy who becomes an instant cutter, but also has the basketball IQ to make the right play off of your pass. Tons of hockey assists.
Yeah, exactly. And it's funny because I remember in Brooklyn, oh wow, so we got from Shams Charania, Kevon Looney agreed to a 2-year, $16 million deal with the New Orleans Pelicans. I'm kind of surprised that he got.
Oh wow.
Now wow, so that's basically $8 million a year. So obviously this is the first time, so he'll be leaving Golden State. My guess is if that's the case, that probably means that Golden State's going to end up getting one of those other bigs, right? So could it be Horford? Could it be Ayton? Could it be, Luke Cornett, whomever else is out there? Brook Lopez, potentially. That probably means that they're going to get one of those guys, unless, I guess, who are the other bigs on their roster? I guess you have Draymond, who played the 5 for them last year, and then you have Trace Jackson Davis, but he kind of was buried. Yeah, but he was like basically excommunicated from the rotation halfway into the season.
Yeah, that's
So,
interesting. This is
yeah, Bleacher
interesting.
Report put out the beacon for Kevon Looney, so that's how you know this is a earth-shattering, franchise-altering move.
I guess.
So, I guess from the New Orleans Pelicans side, so you got Yves Missi, you drafted Derek Queen, you now are signing Kevon Looney. So now you got potentially, I guess, 3 bigs to work with.
Not bad.
Question is, which one do you think should start?
Depends. I think it's gonna be nightly. It's gonna depend on the night, right? Like, I mean, me personally, I would go with DQ just because he's a baller, right? He can work with anything. He's gonna get his, but defensively, I think is what scares me about him because if he's gonna be their starter, then they need to really bolster up the defense in that starting lineup, right? Misi's not that bad actually. As especially as a defender. So that would kind of be interesting. But I feel like it might have to be Looney. You might have to start Looney,
Mm-hmm.
but we'll
Yeah,
see.
we'll see.
Yeah.
So yeah, so yeah, that one was so unexpected because a lot of the reporting was that I think that there was kind of an expectation that Golden State would probably just bring back guys like Looney and Peyton, but now they're gone. I know that there was reporting that Peyton was probably gone, but if you're Golden State, I mean, again, now it's probably just time to bring in a different big. So we'll see. Lakers need to take notes from Nuggets. Well, I mean,
Agreed.
there's got, but the question is, who's the $35 million salary that you can move? Who's the Michael Porter Jr. on your team that you can just be like, we're dumping. We're not dumping because it's Cam Johnson. We're gonna trade you and a pick. I don't know if there's a guy like that on the roster.
Wooey.
Yeah, I mean, Rui could be one of those guys. I mean, but who knows? Maybe he gets dealt anyways. I don't. Like I said, they're in a weird spot where it does feel like that. There was a lot of reporting that suggested that they're gonna try to maybe see if they can get a superstar down the line. But again, who's the free agent, right? Who's the guy that could potentially come down and sign with the Lakers? I mean, because some of these guys are kind of going off the board, right? So some of them you may have to trade for, but we don't know because a lot of that's up in the air. And either way, assets wise, unless a guy says that he wants to go there, it may not be the first choice.
Yep.
Yeah. So I guess so. If you're Golden State, which center do you go after now? Do you think?
Yeah, good question. Brooke Lopez would definitely be at the bottom.
Okay.
I'd go with probably
just continuing to just pick on Brooke Lopez.
Yep. Yes, I will. I think Clint is a great option, but number one, you got to go with DeAndre Ayton, man. It's got to be him because that's the former number one pick, right? Like, this is a guy with, I think, a ton of potential in terms of like the fit, right? If he's locked in, if he's not, then yeah, GG. It might you might be cooked. But if you can get the best out of him, then I think that's a huge upgrade from anybody that you have on the roster. Looney, Trace Jackson Davis, or Draymond. Post even as well. So
yeah. And again, but it is interesting because I mean Looney, he got $8 million. So that probably suggests that most of those other guys are probably going to get somewhere around a similar amount because they're all kind of in the same tier.
yeah, 8, 9, 10, something like that.
Yeah, so end of an era. According to Shams Charania, end of an era in Golden State with Kevon Looney exiting to New Orleans. So, again, we know what he brings. Tough guy, rebounding, physicality, screen setting. I'm curious to see how all of those bigs fit and work in New Orleans. How many of those guys are, whether or not guys are going to compete for minutes or if it's just going to kind of be, like you said, a nightly thing. I'm very curious to see. Especially I'm very curious to see how Derek Queen fits in there. Because, again, I think he was a guy that we both liked in the draft, but I don't know how great I feel about him being in New Orleans.
Yeah.
So I'm curious to see what this looks like. So moving on. So far, we had a long string of a bunch of different things happening, including, in fairness, again, things that we didn't expect. But what's the next move that you're anticipating at this point, if anything?
I'm hoping for Nickeil Alexander-Walker. That would be nice because, the fact that, Chicago was able to do something before, I feel like, Atlanta's got to do something, right? I hope they can kind of just ink that deal and get it over with. Because I feel like if they don't do that, then that might make me feel a little bit lesser on what they look like going into the season.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so according to Bobby Marks, Brooklyn is now projected $17 million below the cap, and that includes the $12.1 million free agent hold of Cam Thomas. So probably, I guess, whenever they potentially re-sign Cam Thomas, right, then that probably means that that will be most of their cap space that'll be used up. So,
Yeah.
they used it on the guys that they drafted, and then they used it on, trading for Michael Porter Jr. So, yeah, Underdog put out a post where they kind of compared Cam Johnson and Michael Porter Jr. stats and their points per game, their three-pointers made per game, and their three-point field goal percentage was basically identical. Now, again, even though those numbers look identical, I don't think they're exactly the same players, but the archetype of player, I think, is very similar. Just like I said, Cam Johnson's not as tall, but, again, he can still kind of, he can still fit into that role. DA
Yeah.
good fit for Warriors or Lakers. I mean, again,
Agreed.
other teams I think could potentially try to compete for his services as well. I mean, Charlotte, who's their center right now? Do they even like?
But
I think
okay,
we talked about Musa Diabate.
okay, but if I'm Ayton, I'm going to a winner. Charlotte's not winning anything. I mean, money talks, so maybe they want to buy something. I don't know.
Free agent center Luke Cornett has agreed to a 4-year, $41 million deal with the San Antonio Spurs. So, as we talked about, we said this was probably going to be a guy that was going to get some type of money that the Celtics were not going to be able to match.
Yeah.
So, the Celtics are starting to kind of run out in terms of bigs because Porzingis, they traded. He's in Atlanta. Luke Cornett, as we just put out there, he's gone. He's going to the Spurs. I'm gonna assume he's gonna be backing up Wemby, right? Which is fine. That's that's solid because he played very well for Boston the last couple of seasons, right?
Yeah.
He's actually turned himself into a good rotational big. And then Horford, his future is still in question because we don't know what he's gonna do. Is he going to go somewhere else? Is he gonna stay in Boston? We don't know. But obviously the Celtics were not going to be able to match that. So, what do you think about that for the Spurs? Because, they were looking at a backup center, and they got one in Luke Cornett. Celtics having a fire sale. Yeah, their goal was to get under the tax or the second apron, and they've definitely got under the second apron.
Yeah, this isn't horrible. I think it's pretty good. You get a quality big, who can give you, a decent amount of rebounds for sure. He'll give you like 5 or 6 a night, efficiently, right? He's not really going to miss and pretty good around the rim. Yeah, good shot blocker as well. Tall. He's like 7'2", so can't really hate on it, right? And it's like it's pretty cool to have him, I guess, back up Wemby because you're not losing out on a whole lot of height, right? Once Wemby does come out, right? So
that's pretty 2 big lineups potentially. With
exactly, yeah,
guys.
double 7-footers, man. It could be interesting.
Yeah, so solid signing for the Spurs. 4 years, I'm just a little surprised because I feel like we haven't seen a lot of 4-year deals from these type of guys. I think he's about 30, so it's not like he's old, but it's also $10 million a year. So maybe that's why, I guess the Spurs must have really, really wanted him. Because otherwise, 4 years. I mean, I guess DFS got 4 years. He's an older guy, Dorian Finney-Smith. Well, he's not that old, but he's about 30, 31. So no real issues with that. So so not a lot of bigs left, I guess, at this point.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you still have Ayton out there. Lopez is still out there. Capella's still out there. So I'd say probably the upper tier ones are still left, which makes sense that they're not going to be signed immediately. It's just a matter of, so what do you think Boston does with the center spot? Because again, like I said, Porzingis is gone. Cornett's gone. And, the only other guys, what is it, like Keita?
Yeah, Neemias Keita.
Yeah, and anyone else? I mean, any other centers?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, you could try and get Hal Horford, but I feel like it seems like he might just be heading out west somewhere. So I don't know what they do. That's tough.
Could that be an Ayton destination?
Maybe. I mean, it's up to him.
Yeah, I mean, that could be a potential destination just because, again, it's another team that's now in the tier of not a lot of center not a lot of centers left on that squad. After
Right.
they were kind of loaded with centers for a while, now they're all kind of gone. All right, so we got looks like Clint Capella, 3-year, $21.5 million deal with the Houston Rockets.
Okay,
Wow.
Houston. I love it. I love it. I love it.
Okay, so they now have Steven Adams, Clint Capella, Alperen Şengün, and they just signed Dorian Finney-Smith, in addition to what they already did, re-signing Jabari Smith Jr., bringing back Fred VanVleet, and obviously trading for Kevin Durant. So there we go. So they're basically stealing everybody's bigs. So I'm curious to see how all those guys play. But also, I guess in fairness, it's like maybe the other teams weren't willing to give him a 3-year deal. Houston probably was. And then in addition to that, I guess you could also maybe look at it as Steven Adams. How many games per season is he going to play? Maybe not a whole lot. So there you go. That one I did not expect at all. That one actually, like, just when I refreshed the page, I was like, is this one of those fake Shams page or something like that? But no, it's a real one.
Scam Sharania, but this is good. This is really good, I think, for the Rockets, right? You can't hate on this whatsoever. They've gotten deeper when I didn't think there was much more that they could do. Wow.
Yeah, so Houston is going for it, and they should go for it. I mean, again, they've made a lot of moves to, put themselves in that spot. So
Wow.
now the nice thing for them is they can pretty much do whatever they want. I mean, they can do double bigs, they can do one big, they can have, like a Capella rebounding, a lob threat big, Steven Adams is like an offensive rebound. I mean, they got a lot of different ways that they can play. So that's some really impressive stuff. And that also probably explains why DFS didn't get all of the MLE or whatever, right? Because then that probably gave them a little bit of space to get Capella.
Yeah.
Because 3 years, 21.5 million, math wise, what's that, like 7?
Yeah, about
It's like
that.
7 million a year.
Yeah.
So
wow. Well, L Warriors, L Lakers, W Houston. Wow.
Yeah.
All right.
There you go.
There we
So
go.
yeah, they're getting all the centers.
Yeah, man. Whew.
That's wild, because this is one of the ones where, like, nobody had this one. I don't think anybody had reported at all that there was interest in Clint Capella going back to Houston. I don't think that had no reportings whatsoever. But I guess that also means that if that's the case, then he'll definitely be a backup. He's not going to be a starter.
Right.
Which is interesting. So I do wonder, like I said, does that mean that the other teams potentially, maybe they didn't, like I said, 3-year deal from Houston. Here we go. Got another thing. Karis LeVert, 2-year, $29 million deal with the Detroit Pistons. So he's leaving Atlanta, and he's going to join Detroit. Again, with the Malik Beasley thing in the air, we don't know what's going to happen. Didn't sound great, but, no assumptions made. We don't know what's going to happen yet. So Karis LeVert, he's going to be, I guess, a backup scorer off the bench. Played, I guess, fine with Atlanta. So we'll see what that looks like. What do you think of this signing?
I mean, it's all right. It's not make or break or anything like that, but I think, Detroit, they did a good job. It's not like they got like a horrible player or anything like that. Like, that's a good score.
It probably also means that that's Nickeil Alexander-Walker's destination, the Hawks. That probably means he's going there. Because I think if they had brought back LeVert, they couldn't get Nickeil Alexander-Walker. So with LeVert going to Detroit, that's probably what's going to happen now. So we just got to wait for Nickeil Alexander-Walker to sign with Atlanta, and there you go. It's not out yet. I was just saying, and then
I know what you
mean. We'll know what to do and where to go from here. So pretty solid. So I think obviously Houston's got to be the winner of free agency so far, because I mean they're loaded now with a ton of players, a ton of talent, and this is kind of the vision, I guess, that Raphael Stone and Ime Udoka wanted, because for the last couple of years, right, there was kind of consistent talks about, like, let's go out and get a star, let's kind of kind of get ready to continue to compete and be a more professional team, and now they're here. So now they have size, they have length, they have perimeter prowess with Durant, they have defense, right, athleticism and everything. So again, we'll see what they do when the season begins. But hey, this is gonna be, now they're gonna be positioned to be one of the best teams in the Western Conference after Oklahoma City. Yeah. And shout out to Denver too, because they did a really good job as well, because even though they're not adding as many crazy players, of course they traded Michael Porter Jr. They're going to bring in Bruce Brown. I think now they've saved a ton of money, so that might push them under the first apron, and so maybe they can do even more. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But those two teams really stick out to me right now. So we'll see, if anything happens after that. But yeah, wow. Yeah, like I said, the Capella one, yeah, had no idea that was coming. So shout out to Houston for, I guess, not allowing any leaks or whatever to come out, because, again, that was not expected at all.
Yeah.
So I guess, so in terms of the next move, the next team, who are the next best guys on the market outside of Ayton
Yeah.
in your mind?
That's the question of the day. I know it's probably gonna sound annoying, but goes back to Nickeil Alexander-Walker. Kuminga as well. Curious what that looks like. You know, is there a trade?
Really think. Well, I think my thought process was maybe he gets moved later, but I felt like I thought it might be most likely that he re-signs and then they deal him later, especially once I heard the stuff about, like, if you trade him, the other team isn't going to be able to send back the same amount of salary.
Right.
I'm not saying that like he's going to stay a Warrior at the end of the season, but it wouldn't surprise me if he's still there.
Um,
And, mhm.
What do we think? Like Gary Trent Jr., Tyus Jones. Anything
For
on
Gary
those
Trent
guys?
Jr., I wouldn't be surprised if he just goes back to Milwaukee. Because I
Got
mean,
it.
like, how much more could he? Because like I think, what was he making? He was like close to the minimum. So maybe he doesn't get. Maybe he gets more than the minimum, but I mean, is he like that much more than a minimum contract player at this point?
Probably not.
So I mean, and I think, yeah, in Milwaukee, I think because he was already there, they can give him a little bit more of a raise. But maybe there's another team that's like, we struck out on player X, we struck out on player Y, we struck out on player Z. So maybe you have Gary Trent Jr. as, third, fourth, fifth option or whatever.
What about
Maybe
Miles
that could be
Turner?
something. You said what?
What about
Oh yeah,
Miles
Miles.
Turner?
I think he just goes back to Indiana.
Agreed. Giddy?
Yeah. Resigns with the Bulls. Probably that big, ridiculous $30 million a year deal where it's like 5 years, 150 or whatever it is.
Okay. Tyus Jones?
That one's tough. I mean, because he's played himself, not that he was even horrible last year, but I think he's probably played himself out of getting a ton of money.
Mhm.
I mean, I guess could he get Ty Jerome money? I mean, I guess he could get Ty Jerome money, but wherever he goes probably is at best like exception level money. So, but he may just end up being like, I don't know if he's going to be a priority signing for any team. So he could just be one of those guys where he's kind of forced to take a minimum again, and then you just go from there. And let's see. It seems like we got some type of signing based off of that reaction that you have. So take it away.
No.
Put it out.
I was just laughing at what you were saying. That's all. No signing.
Yeah.
No signing.
I'm just saying I think he may have potentially played himself out of, like, not that he was ever going to get a ton anyways, but I don't think a team is going to give him more than exception level money at this point. So that means he can probably go to pretty much most any team that probably needs a backup point guard. I mean, could he go to the Knicks? I mean,
Maybe.
they don't really have a backup point guard. Huh?
I said that would help.
Yeah, like they don't really have a backup point guard, and he'd be a good one. I mean, he's a guy that plays with the ball, even though he can shoot and he's got the floater. He kind of also likes to run the offense. So I guess in the non-Brunson minutes that could be a decent addition, but I don't know. So, but back to Kuminga. So your expectation, you still believe that he's going to be a sign and trade guy?
Yeah. You won't be on
Where
the
to?
Warriors. Like I said in our episode, I would go with the Heat. The Heat, they got to take a flyer on the guy. He's young. Not saying he has like franchise guy potential, but he definitely has cornerstone potential alongside those guys, and Bam and Hero for sure. So,
all right. So Yassi Goslin also mentioned that the Rockets don't have enough remaining in their mid-level to sign Clint Capella to these terms. So it looks like a sign and trade is coming, either with this deal or for Dorian Finney-Smith. So that could be one of those other guys on the roster, like maybe a Cam Whitmore or somebody, maybe he gets moved, which,
All right.
again, that's fine.
Yeah, we'll be on the lookout.
Yeah, we will be. Yeah. And yeah, so that's another one of those guys that's, really good with cap discussions and everything else alongside that. So if you're, if you're a team, right, would you like the idea of Cam Whitmore on there? Because we haven't seen a whole lot of him play in a regular Houston setting because he spent a lot of time last year, I think, in the G League. His rookie year, he played a decent amount. Then he got hurt, so then he missed a decent amount of time. Would you take a flyer on him?
Yeah, 100%. I think he's shown
Mhm.
enough to the point where, yeah, he can be a great offensive addition to any team. However, that comes with its downsides because I don't think he's, the most elite defender. He's not the best passer either, right? So you can't be a ball stopper if you're going to be a rotational guy. But at the end of the day, I think he could easily average, 10 to 15 points on a lot of these teams if given the right opportunity, right? But it's all about, where you go. So depending on where he goes, I would be ecstatic to have him.
Yeah. And then, yeah, exactly. And, again, like he's a young guy, he's a really good athlete. Again, we haven't seen a ton of him. We didn't see a ton of him last season, but he's a guy who can, when he gets hot, he can help you score. What else can he really do? Can he kind of expand other parts of his game? Maybe if he continues to get minutes, we'll see. I don't have an issue with a flyer on him, and it's a cheap contract because he was a late first round pick. Because I remember, because he was actually initially mocked as like a top 10 guy, and he fell all the way down to 20, I think, for Houston.
Yeah.
And we saw him, and we also saw him in the summer league in Vegas.
Yes.
Yeah, so with that sign and trade thing with the Rockets, I guess it's probably more likely, right, that it's the Capella part that's a sign and trade, if I had to guess, right? More so than LA. But what do you think? If that's what it is, like, because I think that's what they're saying, that it's going to have to probably be a sign and trade. What do you think? Which one do you think which team do you think it'll probably involve?
Yeah, I would assume it would be LA, right?
You think so?
Maybe. Yeah. I mean, what did you think?
I thought it was going to be Atlanta, only just because, only just from the perspective of, I don't know what the Lakers can do, like with the MLE, and does that stuff get affected? I mean, it could just be like a 3-4 team deal type thing, because again, this is all moratorium period discussion. But again, it's kind of hard to predict something like that. But a lot of the cap people are saying that Houston can't sign both of them right off the bat, that
Right.
one of them has to be a sign and trade. So, and then I guess that's the question, is which guy in Houston is probably in the sign and trade to probably get moved out of there. And I would think it might be Cam Whitmore, but I could be wrong, and it could be somebody else. And I think I saw earlier today that they're also gonna re-sign Jayshawn Tate, who's been there for a while now. I think he's
He was
like,
there
he might be
through
the
dog years. Yeah.
yeah, he might be the longest tenured guy of all those guys, because like you said, I think he was there when the Rockets were bad, like when they weren't a good team at all.
Very
He
bad.
actually, I think at one time, was a starter for them, or at
Yes,
the
he
very
was.
least a guy who would be like a 25-minute a night guy. And
Yep.
now he's more so like a veteran guy who's, probably not going to play as much unless guys are out. But again, a locker room guy too, I suppose.
Yeah. Product of the Ohio State.
Yeah. So now it is 7:45. We've had now in the last hour, we've had a decent amount of action. So Chris Haynes put out that D'Lo reached an agreement with the Mavs on a 2-year, $13 million deal. So reiterating the Shams stuff. But, now we're in this last hour, we've had a lot more stuff, because in that first, 20, 30 minutes, it's pretty slow. And now it's sped up. Then, of course, we had things that we didn't expect at all. Are we expecting any more? What the heck was this? Completely unexpected type of deals coming out of nowhere, because we've had a handful of them in the last 20 minutes or so at this point.
Yeah, I think this might start a trend. We'll see. There might just be guys who we already knew were free agents, but they might just be heading somewhere else. Like you talked about, DeAndre Ayton actually might end up in Charlotte.
Yeah, and according to Sam Amick, the Bruce Brown deal is actually on a vet min. So it's not even, like 5 million or 6, it's not like it's one of those exception level signings. It's a vet min. So pretty good job by Denver, especially if it's a vet min. which
Yeah.
I don't know. I kind of assumed that he wouldn't get a lot. But for him to come back to Denver on a vetman is pretty good.
Yeah.
So moving on, it's 7:45, and now we're still kind of waiting for some of those other bigs to potentially be, in the mix for some of these for some of these free agency teams. But hey, is there a guy that you're eyeing, maybe that not as many people are talking about?
Um, I mean, not really. I mean, like a lot of the guys that I feel like could be super useful are restricted free agents, right? So that's kind of the unfortunate part. Like Quentin Grimes, that's one where it's like if he went somewhere else, that'd be amazing. But we already know he's not. Josh Giddey too. Kaminga, maybe that's a sign and trade. But Jordan Clarkson, that was one. I think he agreed to a buyout earlier, right?
Yeah, he did. He did, and they talked about that the Knicks could be a potential option. Of course,
Right.
nothing's guaranteed or set in stone, but he was a guy that was bought out from Utah. So yeah, and Mark Spears, he was on the NBA Today show. He put out that there seems to be optimism in the Warriors camp. I don't know if that's the word I would probably use, but there seems to be optimism in the Warriors camp that Jonathan Kuminga will re-sign. This market's not good for him. The money's not here this summer. Maybe it is next summer. So again, that doesn't mean that it's a guarantee to happen, but it is something to think about in terms of what's going on around there.
Yeah. Okay. Oh boy, that should be interesting
Yeah.
then.
So available free agents left. Again, Spotrac I don't think has completely updated this entire list, but you still have Brook Lopez, your guy. You still have Malcolm Brogdon, Miles Turner, Tim Hardaway Jr., Duncan Robinson, Luke Kennard. Schroeder, Fred Katz put out the Kings. I guess no one else has put out there, so we'll see if that's completely official. Bagley, I'm not going to go over all these guys, but like Chris Paul's still out there, Horford's still out there, Peyton's still out there. Russ is still out there, and a bevy of other guys.
Yeah.
So again, we're not going to get everybody to sign on day one for sure, but I anticipate and expect that there's still going to be some more, probably at least one more wave of signings coming out within the next, I don't know, probably 15, 20 minutes or so. So of some of those guys that I mentioned, I guess kind of going back, what do you think of Gary Payton II? Because there's no guarantee now that he stays in Golden State, right? We just saw Kevon Looney walk away. So I guess the question is, if you're another team, are you interested in bringing in Gary Payton II? Because I would say earlier in the season, before Jimmy Butler came, he looked like he was kind of trending towards not being like completely done, but he didn't look that great. He was hurt a decent amount. And obviously he's a super athletic guy. So and that's part of his defensive identity and his hustle identity.
Yeah.
But I guess, and then there's also the question of, okay, this is also a guy where he's played very well for Golden State in their system. Is it fair to expect that if he goes elsewhere? But would you like that as a signing for a team?
Not really. It kind of goes back to what you said. I've seen
Brook
him.
Lopez,
Go
2
ahead.
years, $18 million with the Clippers. So he's going to the Clippers. So
Good.
that means he'll be their backup center. So not a starter.
Yeah.
So that's, to me, perfectly fine for the Clippers. I
Yeah.
have no issues with that whatsoever because you get a better backup center than Drew Eubanks, and he's a different type of big than Zubac because he can space the floor and knock down threes for you. So to me, that is a quality signing, I would say, for the Clippers. No issues with that. I would have had a little bit more of a problem if it was like starting center. But also, it's just funny because we didn't really expect it.
Yeah. I like that a lot. For the Clippers and for Brook Lopez, right? You get
Now you're in on Brook Lopez. Okay.
No, I'm just saying like that's
I
a
know,
good
I know.
destination to the point where I don't have to drag him anymore, right? He's not going to be a
Right.
starting center. He's going to back up Zubac, and he could stretch the floor a little bit, but defensively, I don't know. I just don't really know how I feel about him at this point. But regardless, it's still good depth, I think, for sure. Like it would be a complete disaster if he was their starting center.
Yeah. So so now Lopez is off the board. Capella's off the board. So not really too many bigs left at this point, I would say. And I think that gives a little bit more flexibility, I would say, for Milwaukee, if I'm not mistaken. But, now, for these teams that need centers, you're starting to get to a tough point because again, you got Horford, you still have Ayton, and we may not get any Ayton news today, but not a lot of those guys left. So, like I said, I don't have an issue with that for the Clippers. And the Clippers, are a team that I think people were kind of thinking of. They're probably going to do something. They're going to be in the mix for some things because, again, they now, without Paul George, have more flexibility to do these type of deals that they probably wouldn't have been able to do had they kept all those guys together. So that ended up, as we kind of mentioned a while ago, that ended up being probably one of the best decisions that they could have made because they're going to probably just run it back. Again, they brought in Brook Lopez, who I think is an upgrade at the backup center spot than Eubanks. So you got to feel pretty good about, what the Clippers are doing. Again, it may be tough for them to be able to go further, but again, they took the Nuggets to 7. So, there's at least, at least a track record of they were a pretty good team for a while. So like I said, good signing for them.
Yeah, not bad at all.
Mm-hmm. So you'll take that, I would say, if you're the Clippers.
Yeah.
So moving on, that's another free agent to basically take scratch off the list. As I had already mentioned. So now, like I said, you're starting to get to a different point with some of these players. I mean, there may have to be a team that at some point maybe has to be like, Marvin Bagley, come on down. You can be our starting center.
Yeah.
And
It's
I know
getting bad. It's getting bad, man.
and I know that he was on the Wizards for a little bit. Not saying he should be a starting center. Did you like at all what you saw from him in his stint as a Wizard?
I mean, he had his moments for sure, right? Like, it's kind of cool when a guy can put the ball on the floor and just get you a quick bucket. But, how often is that going to happen, especially when you're not the guy? That's where I'd be like, the heck are we doing? But, I mean, he's solid for a rotational big, right? Can somewhat stretch the floor, somewhat protect the rim, but also can give you a bucket. So, I mean, like, if we're talking depth, yeah, perfect. But starting, no.
Yeah, exactly. I would agree with that for sure.
Yeah. All
Yeah,
right.
so I guess so looking around, it's funny now everybody's coming up with the Disneyland memes because, obviously Brook Lopez and his brother, they're big Disney guys. But, I guess you got to settle for Disneyland, which I think is not quite as good as Disney World, but, it's okay.
Yes, sir.
So, I guess yeah, so moving on. So, are there any of these other guys in terms of bigs, like say maybe like a minimum contract guy or something like that, like a Chris Boucher, as a potential stretch big or somebody like that? Would that interest you at all if you're another team?
Um,
I think Bol is also a free agent too. Because I don't think Phoenix brought him back.
yeah.
Pretty sure he's a free.
If I'm gonna be honest, I'd be more intrigued with a guy like Dante Exum.
Okay.
Yeah, that would be the guy that I'm looking at. Yeah,
Yeah.
two-way guy,
Yeah.
played his
Right.
way back into the league, had a solid role for Dallas, right? Was knocking down threes. That was the problem that he had in his first stint in the league. Wasn't really able to hit threes, but defensively, pretty solid guy. So, maybe if somebody misses out on Nickeil Alexander-Walker, maybe they can pick up Dante Exum and be okay with that,
Yeah. Oh yeah. Honestly, I hadn't thought about him in a while, but yeah, because he had that injury that kept him out for quite a while, I think, in Dallas. But when he was healthy, he played very well for them and was, at least regular season wise, a pretty key rotational piece. And like you said, there's a lot of good things that he can do. So, I think if he can find a team, that'd be a pretty good matchup.
Yeah.
because like you said, he's a solid 3-and-D guy. Little bit of ball handling and playmaking and passing, but again, not really a point guard at this point. And like you said, he worked hard to get his way back into the NBA. Now he's a much better and much improved 3-point shooter.
Yeah.
And so Bobby Marks also mentioned for the Brook Lopez signing that the signing comes out of the 14.1 non-tax mid-level. So 2 years, 18 minutes. So that means that the Clippers will have at least some of their mid-level left to use over. So they could use that maybe to bring in somebody else.
True that.
So Chris Paul reunion, potentially?
Potentially. Oh boy.
Would you like that for him with the Clippers or what?
Yeah, that'd be amazing, right? You don't have to go with what's his name? God dang it, Chris Dunn. You don't have to go with him anymore, right?
Yeah. I mean, I guess he's still there. It's just he doesn't
have to run the one. You know what I'm saying? Like, you don't look to him for offense, and that's what happened, right? He got left wide open a lot. So, I think Chris Paul would be a much better option at the one.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah.
Again, you would be adding a couple of older guys to the rotation, but they are guys that can still play and that can still contribute. And I think they'd be better than some of the guys that they were playing towards the, latter part of the season.
Yep.
Right? Because, I mean, like, and not that those guys were horrible, but it was like, what was it, like Amir Coffey, and Terrence Mann is now gone. He's in Brooklyn. So, these are guys that are more so established vets.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Bobby Marks' first apron gets triggered in the Brook Lopez signing in LA, projected $8 million below the cap. So it looks like I was wrong about Lopez. Looks like he's not going to the Lakers, but he is going to Los Angeles.
Yep.
So there you go. Yeah, so it's almost 8 o'clock now. So we're about 2 hours into this, I think. So we still have some guys that are left on the board. We're starting to kind of, move away from some, not all, but some of the key guys. But there's still some players left on the board, I would say. Like, because you still have Ayton. Like I said, we may not know anything about him today. Miles Turner, like I said, he probably goes back to the Pacers, but but either way, his name is still out there. And then, we're still gonna have to wait and see what happens with Kuminga and some of these other guys.
Yeah.
Let's see. So, is there a guy that maybe if you're a team looking to make a trade, is there a guy that's currently on a team right now that you're kind of looking at? Maybe like, say you miss out on a free agent that you might be like, hey, let's see if we can maybe contact this team and try to acquire a little bit.
Let me think on that. Do you have one off the top of your head?
What about not, and I'm not talking about it from a Laker perspective, just from a center perspective. What about, would a team gamble on like a Robert Williams? Because I think, he's a guy that could help defensively. He can help on the boards, but the issue with him is he's misses so much time. I think it's going to be very difficult for a team to feel like that they can make a real move in terms of trading for him, because you don't know what you're going to get out of him availability wise.
Yeah. Yeah, that is kind of interesting.
Mm.
I would, I would take a flyer on that for sure.
Yeah, Keith Wells, Lakers is taking a slumber today. I mean, hey, there are other teams that still have moves that they have to pull off, but again, some of these other teams, they went swinging.
Yeah.
But like I said, if you're Houston, you threw the first, the second, and the third punch, pretty much.
What about RJ Barrett?
Yeah, that's a guy that's been in trade rumors. I know Toronto, Masai Ujiri's out, so that could be a team that could be looking to trade some guys. I mean, I could see it just because he is a young guy. He can score. He's got some other abilities there too. I don't know how much value he has to some of these other teams, but I could see Toronto thinking like, look at all these guys they have on the roster. They have a bunch of guys that are getting paid like a decent amount of money. Some of them, I think, more than you would have thought. Like Emmanuel Quickley's making $30 million a year. Yeah. That's a lot of money, I would say, for him. I don't know if Barrett would be the first guy that they would look at moving, but he would probably be no worse than 2, just because the fit, the amount of guys that they have on their roster. Like, he's not an untouchable guy, but I mean, he's not a bad player. So I could also see Toronto keeping him. I guess, what team would be looking for him? What type of team?
Yeah, that's the
Because,
question.
yeah, like what type of team would feel like, let's take a flyer on RJ Barrett? I doubt it would be a contending team.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, so could it be, a team that's like, hey, we have contracts that we're okay with just dumping to Toronto, but is Toronto okay with that? I don't know. So yeah, we'll see what happens. So Miami, I guess my question is, let's say Miami doesn't get Kuminga. What do they do? Because they were kind of in a weird spot where you had the Butler situation, it blew up. They had to deal him. They got back Wiggins, but really didn't get back a whole lot. I guess they like Davion Mitchell, they re-signed him, but what do they do if they miss out on Kuminga? Like, where do they pivot to? Because then it's like re-sign Tyler Hero at a higher number. You've already extended Bam, right? He's going to be making a lot of money. Those would be your potential 2 foundational pieces. I don't know where you really go with that. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, move on from Rozier. I think that would be the first step, right?
Yeah, and he got cleared with his gambling thing, so he's doing all
exactly.
right.
Yeah,
Okay.
so I mean, I don't know. I mean, if you lose Duncan Robinson and you lose Rozier, you got to do something. I don't know what they could do. That's why I'm like, I feel like they got to put all their eggs in one basket here and just take a swing at Kuminga. You have to. I don't really see them having another option,
Yeah, I guess I do wonder. Let's say if it's a sign and trade, what do you want from Miami if you're Golden State? What would you be taking?
Yeah.
Because I think because again, like I think with the contract options, like they can't take back, but so much because can't take back the same amount. Like if you're Golden State, is there a guy on Miami that you'd be like, all right, let's take him back?
Yeah, that's the question of the day. I don't know. Miami's in a tough spot because they kind of have to either commit to a full-on rebuild or a post-Jimmy retool, and I'm not sure what they're doing right now.
Yeah, and like they're not quite good enough to be like, this is the post Jimmy retool. You'd have to do more than that.
Yeah.
Like if you got Kaminga, that'd be fine if you're Miami, right? Because again, you're not going to be one of the top teams in the East, but I guess at least you can say we have a young guy that can score. He can help make us more athletic because they're not a very athletic team. But if they don't do anything, then I don't really know what you can really do with that.
Yeah.
Like then I guess you're just kind of just okay with being kind of in the middling tier in the Eastern Conference.
Yeah, and I don't know if that's the best spot to be in right now.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, I mean, I guess that's true. So, we'll see what happens. But now we've kind of definitely hit a lull, I would say, in some of the signings. Again, I think Lopez was the last one. That was about 15 minutes ago or so.
Yep.
So we'll see if there's any more, in the next 15, 20 minutes. Like I said, I can't really predict who the next person will be. But do you have a favorite signing so far of the ones that we've seen, like maybe in the last hour or so?
Oh, Clint Capella to the Rockets for sure. That's just amazing. What a phenomenal signing. I don't think anybody saw that coming. Nobody had that ping or anything like that. So awesome for them. And then obviously the cool trade I think was Michael Porter Jr. getting moved. So shout out to Denver for clearing up some flexibility and definitely not just running it back once more.
Yeah, and it looks like Jake Fisher is putting out. Let's see, chat disconnected. Please wait while we try to reconnect you.
Mm-hmm. Bless you.
Interesting. Thank you. So Jake Fisher put out that Atlanta and Minnesota are in active conversations on a sign and trade for Nickeil Alexander-Walker. So I guess my question would be, what's if there's a sign and trade, what's the deal? Do we think can we project like what type of deal that might be?
Yeah, I'm not sure, but I do know Luka Garza has just agreed to a 2-year, $5.5
Thank
million fully guaranteed deal with the Boston Celtics.
Okay, so there you go. That's, I guess, potentially their center replacement.
Yeah. Wow. All right.
Right. So you're a Luka Garza guy. So what do you kind of think of this deal?
I mean, I watched him because he's from around the DMV, but I mean he's cool, old school big, right? Deep post bag, not a good defender at all, but at the end of the day, he does have a lot of offensive versatility. So I mean, I don't think he could be a starter for them at all, but I don't know. What are your thoughts on
Yeah.
it?
I mean, again, they didn't really have a center, so it's like now you're kind of taking a flyer on a young guy. We'll see what he does. I don't remember him being much of a defender. I thought he was more so like an offensive
Yeah, that's what
minded
I was
big.
saying.
Yeah,
Yeah, I was
so
saying he's off. He's not much of a defender at all. He's an
right,
He's very versatile
yeah,
on the offensive end. He has a post bag, and that's about it.
right. So I mean, again, 2 years, $5.5 million, which is very small. So no real issues with that whatsoever. And again, if you're the Celtics, it's not like they're going to give out a bunch of big deals, anyways.
Yeah.
Is the stream down for you?
No.
Okay, because for whatever reason, it's not letting me get back into it.
Uh.
Let's see.
No,
So
it's still
yeah,
live. I just opened it on my phone.
okay, yeah. For whatever reason, it says the site can't be reached for me.
Yeah, I don't know.
Um,
Maybe it's an internet
yeah,
thing, but
yeah, yeah. Let me close the browser and just kind of pull it back up and maybe see if that hopefully fixes it.
yeah. Shout out to the 2
But
viewers that we do have in here.
yeah, shout out to them being very active in the chat and
Sure.
discussions and whatnot. And like I said, Jake Fisher is putting out that they're in active conversations on a sign and trade for Nickeil Alexander-Walker. Yeah, for whatever reason, I cannot get back into this.
Yeah, it's weird. Try on your phone.
Hmm. Yeah, so Twitch account, and then go here, go there. Yeah, there we go. Okay, yeah, I can see it on the phone. For whatever reason, I can't see it on my computer. It is what it is.
Yeah,
I don't know, just kind of bizarre. But
very.
either way, so it does. So I guess based off of the Jake Fisher reporting, that sounds like at the very least that we are going to see Nickeil Alexander-Walker at some point go to the Atlanta Hawks. I guess the question is, if it's a sign and trade, who comes back going to Minnesota, unless the case is that I believe Atlanta has that giant trade exception. So there is a world where I guess they could just absorb him into the trade exception and then just give Minnesota some type of pick compensation. That might be the most likely scenario. Only if anything, only because Minnesota is getting right up to that second apron. So I don't even know if they can really realistically take another guy back.
Yeah, true that.
I mean, I guess they could, but you know. But yeah, so I guess for the Celtics, if they so Cornette's gone, Porzingis is gone, Horford's out, Garza's in. So I guess, for Horford, because we don't know, do you anticipate that he actually does leave Boston and go elsewhere?
I'm not sure, but
Okay,
we just
there you
got
go.
Nickeil Alexander-Walker has agreed to a 4-year, $62 million deal with
There we
the
go.
Atlanta
There we
Hawks, plus a player option and a trade kicker.
go. Okay. So 4 years, 62 million, what, like a little over 15 million a year?
I'll
So that's
take it.
beyond so that's beyond the MLE. And I think that's why, the Atlanta one made a lot of sense because, they had the massive trade exception. And so they had the ability to potentially, kind of bring him in, and give him a dollar amount that the other team I don't think was able to pull off, if I'm not mistaken. They didn't mention anything about the trade exception, but if it's a sign and trade, I'm going to assume that's how they're going to bring him in.
Yeah.
And so if you're Atlanta, that's a great move. So that's another team that I think has made some really good decisions so far this offseason because, they did some really good work in the draft and now they're going to top it off with free agency. And so now they're going to have a group of guys that, again, no people probably aren't going to pick them to make it out of the East, but in theory, they should be one of the better teams in the Eastern Conference. With the Celtics kind of being in a gap year, the Pacers probably without Halliburton. So they're not going to be looked at as the best team, but they're going to be, I think, a team that can realistically compete in the Eastern Conference, right? And a
Yeah.
guy like Nickeil Alexander-Walker, fit-wise, that's a guy who's, a really good 3-and-D swing player, right? Kind of, I guess, like you could say 2-3. He played pretty well for Minnesota in terms of shooting the three. Playoffs was a little bit more up and down, but when he gets hot, right, that's a pretty good value as a three-point shooter. And like I already mentioned, he's a good defender, a good connecting piece, and that continues to go with a lot of these more defensive-minded guys that Atlanta has started to bring in and has started to build together. So that fits in with this identity that they're forming there. And like I said, I've pretty much liked everything Atlanta's done, right? From this to also getting back unprotected first from New Orleans in the draft, right? So that they can move 2 spots back. So New Orleans takes their queen, and then Atlanta takes Asenge, I think. So pretty good. Good
Yeah.
deal.
Not bad at all.
Yeah, and that was kind of one of the main big guys that we were waiting for, in a way.
Yeah.
So yeah, so you'll take that, I think, every time if you're the Atlanta Hawks. So that's another guy off the board. So now, who's next?
Yeah. That's the question of the day.
Yeah, so, but yeah, like either way, again, if you're the Hawks, like I said, you got to be really happy with everything they've done. Is Dyson Daniels going to be up for an extension or no?
This like right now?
Yeah, like this summer. Is he due for an extension?
I'm
Because
not
I thought he
sure.
was going into year 4.
Yeah, I'm not sure actually.
Yeah, so because I would imagine whenever he can, I'd imagine he would get, he'll get an extension at some point.
Mm. So it looks like next year he's going to be a restricted free agent.
Okay.
So 2026, 2027.
Okay. Got it. Either way, I'm sure he'll re-sign and get, a big deal with Atlanta, and he'll be
Yeah.
worth it just because, he came there in that deal. And it's funny actually from an Atlanta perspective where they looked like they made the DeJounte Murray deal and they were in a nightmarish situation, right? Where they gave up multiple unprotected picks, looked like they completely screwed themselves over. And credit to them, they were able to get out of it. I mean, they even changed their front office.
Yeah.
People weren't sure if that was actually a good change. And so far, everything that they've done kind of, vindicates the decisions that they made now. Because now they're in a much better spot than they were before. And I think this is one of the more ideal type of teams to put around Trae Young. And we'll get to see what him and the Hawks potentially do this season for Atlanta. Because, now they're in a spot where you got him, you got Jalen Johnson, right, who before he got hurt was looking like a majorly improved player. And then you still have Risa Shea, who was a great number 1 overall pick for them, had a really good rookie year. Dyson Daniels, most improved player. And then, whatever else they're going to do around the margins. Acquired Porzingis. Don't know how much he'll play. If he can play at all and be somewhat productive, that's a good move. So lots to like about what they did.
Yeah.
According to Chris Haynes, Hawk star Trae Young was very vocal and active in recruiting Nickeil Alexander-Walker to Atlanta. Sources tell me he was heavily involved in the process to lure one of the top wing free agents on the market. And in fairness, they could also, I think, give him some of the most money. But still, either way, that's a big deal. So we'll get to see, what Quinn Snyder does because he's the guy that now has seemingly earned the trust of the Atlanta team in terms of as a coach because they've had to go through a number of them, and so now it seems like he's got a good relationship with Trae Young. So, like I said, I can't wait to see what they do. I think they're going to be really good next year.
Yeah, I agree with you. They're the dark horse for me to come out of the East.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 100%. So, moving on in terms of some of these other guys left on the board, I guess we still haven't heard anything about Ayton, so we'll see what happens with that. What about like a Tim Hardaway Jr.? What do you think of him as a potential free agent signing for a team?
Yeah, that's a good
'Cause he
question.
was a
I
guy
was
that
going to bring him up.
yeah, because he was the guy that was kind of cast aside, in Dallas, where he was in Dallas. They got to the finals, wasn't as big of a part of that team. Then he gets traded to Detroit, starts for them, has a pretty good year, and now he's a free agent. I don't know if Detroit will bring him back. So, I don't know where he goes if he ends up leaving Detroit, because he's a guy that can kind of just fit in on probably any team, since he's primarily a 3-point shooter.
Yeah, I'm sure there's a market out there for him. I'm not sure, what the um what the market is, right now. I don't think he'll be a day one.
I don't think so either.
Yeah.
I think he'll be another one of those guys where most of the other guys are off the board, and now you're like, all right, well, let's pivot to Tim Hardaway Jr. I think he's going to be one of those guys.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Bobby Mark said, keep an eye on a sign and trade from Minnesota in this signing. Atlanta would preserve their 14.1 non-tax MLE, and then Minnesota would create a trade exception. So that's the other part for Atlanta. So let's see. So Jake Fisher said they are sending a second-round pick and cash to the Timberwolves. So yeah, so that means that Minnesota gets a trade exception. So I guess they could use that in a trade, just kind of bring somebody in, and then Atlanta, I guess Bobby Mark said they'll still have their 14 million non-tax MLE.
Okay.
So that could be something that they could use. I don't know if there's any non-MLE, non-tax MLE guys at this point left, but maybe they could. I think that you can use it in a trade as well, or you could just split it and give it to like 2 guys or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I get, and then if you're Minnesota, I guess you lost out on Nickeil Alexander-Walker, but I mean, I guess now maybe you just say like DiVincenzo, you move to the 2. You elevate Rob Dillingham. I guess more minutes for Terrence Shannon Jr. Is that kind of how we would look at it from Minnesota's perspective?
Yeah. Big time. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you look at it as a significant loss?
Not the end of the world, because I think Terrence Shannon Jr. can definitely be a dog for them, right? You saw the trust in the postseason. Granted, you do lose an elite defender, but I think Terrence Shannon Jr. can be that guy for sure.
Yeah. And again, they also get a trade exception, Minnesota does, so they could in theory use that to just absorb a player, in a trade. I don't know, who it would be, but it at least gives them a little bit more flexibility. So no issues there. Yeah, and Shams put out the same thing that Jake Fisher put out, a 2027 second-round pick via Cleveland and cash to Minnesota.
Yeah.
So pretty good job by both teams, because if you're Minnesota, rather than just letting them walk, you at least get back a trade exception.
Yeah.
So I think you got to feel good about that if you're both teams. And again, I think of the 3 players that they had a potential chance to lose, I think he would have been the guy that you kind of feel like, if we have to lose him, that's the one that we're probably the most okay with losing. Not Naz Reid, and then not Julius Randle.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on Minnesota, I guess, going into next season with this group? Because I mean, the offseason isn't done, right? But at the very least, we have a decent idea of what most of their team is going to look like. How do you feel about them going into next year?
Yeah, I don't know, man. I mean, kind of wishy-washy on them, but I think they can make an impact for sure. What about you?
Yeah, I mean, I think because they've gone back to the conference finals and back-to-back seasons,
Yeah.
like, you do have to give them the benefit of the doubt of that they're probably still going to be one of the better teams in the Western Conference. They started off pretty rough, right? Because even with the way that they finished last season, they were the 6th seed. I think the hope is whatever issues that were going on in terms of not being able to kind of optimize the roster, maybe that won't happen going into next year. You hope and pray that Rob Dillingham in year 2 looks a lot better than he did as a rookie, or at the very least, gets more consistent minutes and more consistent production. And then you assume Edwards continues to get better. Probably hope that Gobert doesn't get worse. And then hope that Randall still continues to, play like it's a contract year and not just be like, well, now I got my money, so now I'm okay. So I think you're just kind of assuming that at the very least, Ant gets better, Dillingham gets better, and that no one else gets worse. And if that happens, then you'll still be in the mix. Again, they're not going to be favored. Oklahoma City, like I said, is going to be the prohibitive favorite in the Western Conference. But Minnesota is probably in the upper tier of the rest of the pack.
Yeah, I agree.
Like yeah. So I mean, depending on who you rank where, right? They're probably no worse than like third after they're probably no worse than like third or fourth. I mean, where would you rank them?
Probably around that area, 4 or 5,
And
maybe.
and we just got Tyus Jones a 1 year, $7 million deal with the Orlando Magic.
Not bad. I don't really hate it.
No, I mean,
Yeah.
so I guess now it's kind of funny because now they've sent out some of these other guards. So Cole Anthony's gone, KCP's gone. You bring in Desmond Bane, you bring in Tyus Jones. So you bring in guys that are now a little bit more skilled offensive players. Tyus Jones, that's, again, not an elite level guy, right? But he is a guy that can help you run your offense. He can shoot the ball. We know he's got a decent assist to turnover ratio. Again, I think he was overtaxed as a starter in Phoenix last season. I'm going to assume that he will come off the bench and be a backup this time around in Orlando. And if that's the case, then I'm perfectly fine with this. And I think that's going to be really helpful for Orlando, where they're trying to build. They're trying to be another one of these teams. It's like, hey, if Paolo continues to improve, if Franz Wagner continues to improve, we could be one of the best teams in the Eastern Conference for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah. I think they're building something special over there. They drafted Jace Richardson as well. So you definitely have some creation and some offense coming off that bench, and I love it. And you also have Anthony Black as well. So, I think they do have a ton of like role players that could easily, put them over the edge.
Yeah. And especially, I think the thing is, most of these guys that are coming in are more offensive oriented guys. So they were one of the worst offensive teams in the league last year. So, yeah, maybe that you might make a case that maybe they take a step back defensively. But, who are the main guys that they're losing? They're losing KCP, who wasn't as good last year. And then they're losing Cole Anthony, who really isn't known as much of a defensive guy, anyways. So, you're making, I think, some pretty significant upgrades on the offensive end, and you're not going to lose that much defensively. Now I guess now you have a couple of guys that could be targeted, but you have so many other long, athletic, physical guys that it's not going to be as bad as maybe a team like Phoenix, right, where they didn't really have those type of players, that type of personnel to protect him. So, like it a lot for Orlando, and I think it's so according to Keith Smith, his contract will likely come out of the non-tax MLE for the Magic, which will also hard cap Orlando at the first apron. So, but again, their roster is pretty close, I think, to being set, if I'm not mistaken. So, good work by Orlando.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a guy that we were talking about earlier in the stream as, could he be a guy that could be a decent backup point guard for a team? And, now he's off the board going to Orlando. And it actually, credit to him, this is more than the minimum, which is kind of what I wasn't sure whether or not he was going to get, but he ended up getting, $7 million.
Yeah, not bad at all.
Which I think money wise, that's about on par. I think with what's fine for him.
Mm-hmm.
I guess where would you rank Orlando in the Eastern Conference? Would you rank them ahead of a team like Atlanta? Would you rank them ahead of some of those other ones, or would you kind of put them sort of in like the middle tier?
No, I'd put them right in the tier. Well, I mean, like it depends because are we talking about like every team full strength?
Well, take out Boston and Indiana because
Okay.
since we don't know about when those guys will be back, I don't think you can put them in the equation as of right now.
So I would say it's Cleveland, New York, Philly, then Orlando, then Atlanta.
Okay.
That's what I would go with. And then Milwaukee or Detroit or something like that.
Yeah, I think that's a fair list. The Philly one, I guess, it's all based off of health. That's the one that's the biggest question mark because that's the one that's got the most issues in terms of concerns about whether or not these guys can stay healthy. You got to hope and pray that Embiid and Paul George, have bounce back years in terms of health, bounce back years in terms of production because they were not at their best next year and they didn't play a whole lot. So if those guys are healthy and productive, yeah, they could be good. I don't know how much you can realistically bank on it.
Yeah,
I think some of
exactly.
the other ones, maybe their ceilings, like their best player may not be as good as the best version of Embiid, but the floor is probably higher just because they're a little bit more available. But with Orlando, they had a ton of injury issues last year, so it's not like you can completely bank on them. Jalen Suggs missed a ton of time, as did Franz and Paolo.
Yeah.
So if all and Suggs is a guy that just has not really been able to stay healthy at all. I don't think Franz and Paolo have been super injury prone, but
Yeah.
we definitely haven't been able to get a ton of games out of Jalen Suggs. And to me, you need that if you're going to be really good in the East if you're Orlando. Desmond Bane helps offset some of that, but the best version of them obviously is going to have all four of those guys available.
Mm-hmm.
But at the very least, again, no issues with that one. It's funny because we haven't really seen like a ton of Eastern Conference teams make the moves that we've seen a lot of the teams out West do, right? Because like, most of the big moves that we've talked about so far are guys going to the Western Conference, right? Like Brook Lopez, Clint Capella, and all those other names that we've mentioned. I mean, Nickeil Alexander-Walker, is he like the biggest Eastern Conference signing that we saw today?
Pretty much. And that's not a good thing, I don't think, for the East, right? But I guess that shows you, the balance of power that we have right now.
Yeah, the Western Conference, again, there's going to be a lot of good teams, and even, some of the bad teams may not be as bad as some of the worst teams in the Eastern Conference. The West one, I'm curious to see how people rank that one, because like I said, OKC is clear-cut number one, but I am curious to see how the rankings are after you go past Oklahoma City, because I think you'll probably see a decent amount of like variety in terms of what people think, because I think obviously you'll have some people put Houston at 2. I think you'll have some people put like Denver at 2. Some people might put Minnesota at like 2 or 3. But it's just funny because in the East it definitely feels like, it's not quite as tiered. Even though like you feel like Cleveland's the best team in the Eastern Conference, there's no guarantees, from them because of what we just saw in the playoffs. And you still have to bank on those guys being healthy too, which we haven't had Garland had a healthy postseason yet. Again, different circumstances, not really his fault, but so far, he had the jaw injury 2 seasons ago, and then last season he had the foot issue.
Right.
Yeah, and now again, they replaced Ty Jerome with Lonzo Ball, not a bad replacement at all. But how much better do you feel like Cleveland will be next year, if at all? Or do you think they take a step back?
I think they'll be not as good as last year, but still very good. I think they'll be the number 1 seed in the East. I think that's guaranteed, right? We already know how good they are during the regular season. Figured a lot of stuff out. Postseason, they got to be healthy, and they have to show up, and they have to really want it. So, I mean, I don't expect them to be horrible. Like, do I expect them to be as potent as this year? Probably not. I expect them to be a 60-win team, but maybe not 64.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and who knows? I mean, again, a lot of this is still up in the air, but yeah, we're definitely not going to have. I don't think we're going to have 2 60-win teams in the Eastern Conference next season, right? Because Boston's not winning 60 games. Maybe Cleveland does. I mean, but hey, I mean that's not the easiest thing in the world to do. And the thing is, for them last year, right? They didn't have like a ton of guys miss time due to injury. I know there were guys that were kind of like in and out, but nobody missed like 20 plus games, I don't think, on Cleveland's side last year in the regular season. They all, unfortunately got banged up in the postseason, it seems like.
Yeah.
Yeah, so at this point, it's 8:30 p.m. on the East Coast, so there's still some other guys that could potentially be off the board. Tyus Jones was the last guy. That was about 10 minutes ago. We just talked about that. So what are these other guys that you're kind of looking at on the list? I know you're kind of a Bowl guy. Is there any team that you could see him, kind of squeezing into? Probably not as like a second string guy, but like, do you think he gets on an NBA roster? Because I know he's a guy that's got some fans, even though he's a polarizing player.
Yeah, I mean, he's cool, right? Like, he was like the Wemby before Wemby. He was, or supposed to be, advertised in college, but, with the foot injury, whatever the case may be, lack of motor, I don't know. But I don't know, man. I feel like we go through this stupid cycle with Bull every time that he's a free agent, right? Like we always say, oh yeah, he never got an opportunity, so and so. Like let's take Denver for example. Oh yeah, he never got an opportunity in Denver. Okay, he signs with the Magic or whatever happened there, right? And
I
then
think he was traded.
there you go, traded to the Magic. It's like, yes, new situation. He's finally gonna get his time to shine. Yeah, never really gets it. Does like a couple of plays and then he posts them himself, right? Then gets moved again to what? Phoenix. Yeah, new opportunity. He's going to showcase everything he's got. Their center rotation isn't even that good. He's going to learn behind Kevin Durant. Didn't really get anything. So at this point, I think the majority of NBA fans should be done on him. I think we should kind of give up on, the fact that, he could be something super special. Like at this point, he's pretty much another Thon maker. And I'm not trying to like hate on him at all, but like I just don't think that there's a team that would be willing to take a flyer on him because they're not really going to give him an opportunity.
Right. Yeah. And again, he may just be like a third stringer at this point, I would say.
Yeah, and those guys don't really get opportunities, so.
Yeah. And like you said, he already had opportunities. Again, I'm not like a huge Bowl guy anyways, but just as a whole, like you said, just the opportunities were kind of there. Just it never really worked out. But now the opportunities are kind of gone. Although again, he could be a guy where like he may be just a minimum contract guy on one of these teams if they literally just, kind of lose out on anyone and everyone. Like I said, I definitely think that there's going to be some guys that we will not get an answer to today. That's kind of one of the things about the 6 p.m. start to free agency, because in the past, when it was at midnight, you kind of knew, okay, once we get to like 2, 3 a.m., you're not getting any more signings, right? Like nobody's going to put out a signing to reporters at like 4 in the morning. You're not getting that. But now with it being at 6, right, you don't really know, like, because I remember last year we had a few where like when we ended the stream, then like 15 minutes later or something like that, then you had a few signings and it's like, well, that would have been nice to kind of discuss on stream, but
sure.
Stuff like that happens. But do you think that we get any more tonight?
I don't know. I feel like if we don't get any by 9, then we're probably done, right? But we'll see. Who knows? Because at this point, it seems like all the candidates who would be, good fits for day one, probably all gone by now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's still guys that are left. It's just, they're not going to be number one priority guys by most of these teams. Aside from, I guess, Miles Turner for Indiana, but assuming they're trying to agree to whatever they're going to re-sign him to. Like I said, I would expect him to be back with the Pacers. I guess it would. I guess is there any reason? Is there maybe a reason why that hasn't happened yet? Considering that a lot of these other guys re-sign even before today. Like we were getting stuff about guys re-signing like in the last couple of days.
Yeah, good point. Maybe they weren't high on the postseason that he had, especially the finals. Maybe. I don't know, but I feel like that's not a big enough reason to let the guy walk, right?
Right.
Yeah, I think he'll be back. I think it may not be day 1. It might be day 2, whatever the case may be. Maybe they're working out the kinks of the deal. I don't know, but I expect him to be back at some point.
Yeah, and in terms of walking, there's not really anywhere you can really walk to. It would have to be a sign and trade, but like you said, you wouldn't think that that would be a reason to just not bring him back at all because you don't have anybody to really replace him with. It's like Isaiah Jackson. I mean, is he? He missed all of this season because he had the Achilles tear. So like you said, and like we said in our previous episodes, we think he'll be back. It's just I just kind of assume since most of the other guys re-signed day 1 that maybe we wouldn't see it at 6:01, but we'd probably see it relatively soon. Okay. I remember this guy. So Nigel Hayes-Davis, the 2025 EuroLeague champion and Finals MVP, as well as Turkish Cup champion and MVP, has agreed to a fully guaranteed 1-year contract with the Phoenix Suns. The 2-time EuroLeague first-teamer returns to the States and NBA. I kind of remember him, but it was kind of a blur because I think it's been a while. I think he's about 30, if I'm not mistaken. He's like 30. I think he was on the Lakers, the Raptors, and the Kings, but it was like a very, 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 they were very short stints. Like, I don't think he played. He was like maybe a 10-day guy on a couple of those teams, I think. He spent most of his career overseas. But I do kind of, but I don't know. I don't remember enough about him to be like, oh, this is how he plays. This is his game. I don't want to pretend like I know a ton about him. But I do remember the name.
Yeah,
But
I don't even know who
definitely
that
not
is.
something I would have. Definitely not a guy that I would have expected. But again, I don't remember much about his game. But if he's coming over and he's one of the top EuroLeague guys, right? This could be not the same type of player, but it could be like a Yabusele type of thing where guy that played really well, not in the Olympics. This is, EuroLeague, and he's coming over to the NBA, and maybe he plays really well for them.
Yeah, I've never heard of him. I'm gonna have to do like a deep dive on him.
Yeah, he's 6'8", so he's a 6'8", 230 guy. So I guess like a forward. So
Good frame.
that
Good
profile,
frame.
that type of player, that could be a potential good signing for Phoenix.
Yeah, they need that.
Yeah, so good job here. But like I said, that's a name that I had honestly forgotten about.
Right.
Yeah, so let's see. So Dave McMenamin just put out a minute ago. Rich Paul also told ESPN he informed both Rob Pelinka and Laura Beth Seeger, Luka Doncic's business manager, about LeBron James's intent to pick up his option. In the statement he planned to release before it happened Sunday, no one was blindsided. So he just put that. So McMenamin just put that out a minute ago. Initially, when I saw the name, I thought maybe there'd be something free agency wise, but it looks like that wasn't the case.
Yep.
Yeah, so yeah, that one definitely came out of nowhere. But like I said, in fairness, I don't know, enough about the guy to be like, oh yeah, let's talk about, his game, because like I said, I haven't seen him and I don't want to, I don't want to lie to the audience. And
Yeah,
just be
I
like, oh,
don't even know who it is, so you're good.
yeah, so maybe, uh maybe they put out some more stuff about him, but again, size wise, frame wise, right? That's another bigger ish player that if he pans out and if he is good, that could be a good, that could be a solid addition for them. And like I said, I'm thinking this could be like a Yabusele type of deal where it's like, bring a guy over from overseas that played really well overseas and see if he can, contribute at the NBA level. I mean, he was already in the NBA before, but he's probably a better player now than he was then. So, yeah, that was definitely not the next expected signing for me.
Me neither.
So, is he the KD replacement?
I no.
No.
I mean, like
I'm
he's gonna
surprised
give you.
I'm surprised that you actually entertained the question.
Yeah, I was just looking through my notifications to see if I missed anything, but no, he's not the next Kevin Durant.
Yeah. I think it was, what is it, Bruno Caboclo?
No.
Yeah. So 8:38. The last signing that we got was Nigel Hayes Davis. So like I said, that was not a guy that I had on the free agency board, but again, pretty impressive that they were able to kind of get that done. So I guess if we're kind of looking at some of these other free agency guys, what about like a Duncan Robinson? Because there was the reports about him doing the turning down or taking the early termination thing, right? Where I guess he's a free agent and maybe he comes back or maybe he goes elsewhere. Do you think he goes back to Miami, or do you think he ends up being like a potential sign and trade guy?
And who's this again?
Duncan Robinson.
Oh yeah. It would hurt Miami if they lost him, for sure. But I it's kind of tough to think about, I guess, but sign and trade, I don't know. I mean, cuz realistically, would anybody really want to offer a whole lot to get him? Right? I mean, like, he's valuable. 3-point shot. I think he just goes back to Miami. Why wouldn't he?
Yeah. I mean, I guess it just depends on, if he leaves, then it's probably a sign and trade. I mean, how many teams at this point have like just the cap space to just give him, whatever would be. So it looks like Chris Haynes said Phoenix Suns and franchise player Devin Booker are in talks on a contract extension eligible for a 2-year, $150 million max extension. So that is a lot of money, right? And we'll see, what Phoenix does to continue to build around Booker. Obviously, they already did some things, right? They traded Kevin Durant, made a bunch of moves in the draft, drafted Kaman Malawak and a couple other guys. Then they also traded for Mark Williams, traded for Jalen Green and Dylan Brooks, from Houston. So, now I guess they're going to commit to building around Booker. They still have Bradley Beal on their roster. Don't know what they're going to do with him. But, now I guess that locks him up for at least a couple more years.
Yeah, that's cool. Great job. Keep that talent around, man, because Book is underrated severely.
Yeah, and I guess the question is, what do we expect from the Suns next year? I mean, now that Durant's gone, they're no longer going to have championship expectations. I think most people just kind of assume that they're probably going to be mediocre at best. Is there a world where Phoenix is a good team next year? Or is it more so likely that they'll just be, mediocre, or like, oh, well, now the record doesn't feel the same because we don't have Kevin Durant, we don't have championship aspirations.
Well, think about it like this, right? We know.
Mm-hmm.
Let's go through the teams that we can pencil in. You can pencil in Oklahoma City. You can pencil in Houston. You can pencil in LA. Both LA teams, actually. You can pencil in Denver. Pencil in Minnesota. Probably pencil in Golden State. Memphis. Dallas. So I think that last spot is probably up for grabs, right? It's not going to be Sacramento. Not going to be Portland. Probably not going to be New Orleans.
Utah.
Not going to be Utah. So it's really up to Phoenix and San Antonio. I feel like that'll be up for that last spot, maybe. So
and I guess which team do we kind of maybe think might be better next season, Spurs or Suns? I guess would be the main question.
Spurs for me.
Yeah, I'd say Spurs, assuming Wemby's healthy, and assuming, again, maybe that might be too much to ask for some of this other stuff, but like assuming Harper's good, Castle's good in year 2,
Fox,
Wemby's healthy, and Fox are healthy, like that should be a better team. Yeah, Vassell, that should be a better team than the Suns. So I think we're basically kind of answering the question where it's like, yeah, they'll probably be a mediocre team.
Just like last year.
Just like last year. Yeah, except, the difference will be it's kind of expected. Like, It's not going to be as much of a disappointment if they have the same, like, say they have the same record next season as they did this past season. Like, it's not going to feel the same because this season they were expected to be a 50-win team, right? And how many games did they win, this past season? They went 36-46.
Yeah.
So, I guess that would be the main question is, are they going to be 500? Can they be a 500 team with this roster?
No.
And 500 wouldn't be good enough to make the playoffs anyways, but we're not really talking about playoffs.
No, you need more. Oh. You need more to be 500, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then I guess the other question is Phoenix done? Like, because again, they have Green on the roster. Everybody's saying as of right now that he's probably not going to get moved. But, is there a possibility that he could? But like I said, my issue with that was I couldn't really find a team where I'm like, oh yeah, this is in the trade machine. This is where I think Jalen Green should go. Like, I didn't really see a lot of destinations for him. So, I mean, I would think that Beal would probably be the one that they would be trying to work to move the most, but he might just be stuck there because no trade clause. Maybe if there's a destination that he likes, maybe he might be okay with going elsewhere, but I don't know where that is.
Yeah, I don't know. I think I would have to see what they get in return for Beal. Then I can make a definite decision on, how I feel about them.
Right. But at the very least, the things that they've done so far, I think we all like. So it's not like we don't like any of the things that they did, because again, you traded Durant. You weren't going to get back a king's ransom, but at the very least, you can be like, yay, we got Dylan Brooks. Yay, we got, Jalen Green. And then, they got the bigs that they got in the draft. So got to feel pretty decent about that. But again, I like you and I both said, I don't think you can expect that either of those guys are going to be, or that team is going to be a playoff team next year. I don't think you can expect that one.
Yeah.
But either way, if you're the Suns, like, yeah, lock down Booker now, get the extension, and then, do whatever you want later. And if you're Booker, same thing, right? Because there'd be no reason to ask for a deal now and not get the extension. Go out and get the money, and then either you stay in Phoenix long term, or down the road, maybe you do something later. Like, there'd be no real, 70 or 2 years, 150 million or whatever. Like, that's a lot of money. I mean, you're talking about 70 plus million a year.
Yep.
So, there'd be no way you could turn that down if you're Booker.
Yep.
Yeah, so 8:45, since the the Nigel Hayes Davis report and the Booker extension, we haven't really had anything recently. So, again, a lot of the same guys that we've kind of talked about still on the board. And again, we both have said that not everybody's not everybody's going to sign on day one anyways, which nobody should have expected that, because that's not normally what happens. But even after day one, there'll still be some decent players on the board. Ayton's still on the board. And again, I don't know if we'll get an answer for that one tonight, because I'm sure he probably is weighing his options and trying to figure out what he wants to do and where he wants to go. Some of these other guys that we've already talked about aren't day one signings anyways. Like, some of these guys are just going to have to wait for other players to be off the board, and then they'll probably get, a contract, right? Like, I don't know, Corey Joseph is probably not a day one signing for a team.
Yeah.
Right? He's probably, like, if he's going to be on a roster, he's probably going to have to wait until some other guys get signed before anything really happens there.
Yeah.
So I guess, so if we go, let's say we look at the Spurs, right? So they re-sign, or not re-sign, they brought in Luke Kornet. So what are your expectations for the Spurs going into next season? Because I think our assumption and expectation is that they'll be better. Do we think they'll be better enough to make the playoffs? Do we think that it's just better enough to be in the play-in and have a chance to make the playoffs? Could they be even better than that and, like, win a playoff series? Like, how far, or what are your expectations for them? How far do you think they could realistically go in terms of how good could they be? What's their ceiling with this team as currently constructed? Because we don't know what's going to happen later on.
I think they could be the 8th seed, get out of the play-in, and potentially win a series. Hopefully everything goes well in terms of their health and stuff like that. I'm expecting the chemistry to look a lot better, right? I'm also expecting some teams to slide back, right? Like Dallas, what do they look like by the time the postseason will start next year? What does Golden State look like? What does Memphis look like, right? So I am kind of monitoring that, but I think the Spurs will be primed for like an amazing season. Not like an all-time one or anything like that, but definitely exceed expectations, right? Because you got Steph Castle, you're expecting internal development from him. You got Fox, who we already know, super elite, underrated. You also have Dylan Harper coming in, who will have an immediate impact as well. Vassell, what does that look like? And obviously Wemby, right? So they have a ton of things going for them, I think, but it's just a matter of staying healthy.
Yeah, so they could be like what Houston was a couple seasons ago, right? Where, like, they get to 500, they have a chance to make the play-in, but maybe they actually could make the play-in.
Yeah.
And then, like, again, probably wouldn't win a playoff series, but maybe if everything goes right, they could maybe give a team a scare. I think that would have to be like best case scenario. Literally everything has to go well. Probably more likely play in, maybe playoffs if they can knock out a couple of teams.
Yeah.
Like, I think they can make the playoffs, but I wouldn't guarantee or pencil them in like we mentioned with some of the other teams. And now my chat works again, so now I can see the comments in the chat. The only one that we've gotten since then is Suns will flame out from Keith Wells. But the problem is, in order to flame out, you had to have flamed on in the first place.
Yeah, right.
I don't expect Phoenix to flame on next season. Right. That would be kind of be the main thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I do kind of wonder with the Spurs, because again, like you said, you hope Harper will be good as a rookie. You hope Castle takes a leap. You got Fox, you got Wemby, you got Vassell, and then you have maybe Sohan. Now you have all these other bigs that you could potentially put out there at different points, right? And year 3 Wemby, if he's healthy and hopefully recovered from the blood clots, he's been doing a ton of offseason stuff that looks pretty cool. So if all that works out, I mean, you could have an all NBA guy on your hands, defensive player of the year type guy, and potentially a playoff team. Like I said, I would say probably play in, but you never know, because if Wemby is even better than you think, who knows? He can maybe push them even further. Because I mean, even with all the wacky stuff, well, and as well as things that weren't great, that happened last season, like the record wise, I mean, they didn't have the worst record in the league, even with Wemby not playing a ton of games, right? They were 34-48, which again isn't great, but that's only slightly worse than Phoenix. And, for the Spurs, you got 46 games of Wemby last year. So he missed almost half the season. And then, the De'Aaron Fox trade wasn't until late. And I think he played 17 games with the Spurs. Yeah, he played less than 20 games with the Spurs. So we haven't even really gotten to see a lot of what Wemby and Fox look like together. In addition to all the other things that, we haven't seen just yet.
Yeah, that is true.
Yeah, and I guess for Dylan Harper, how good do we expect him to be out of the gates?
Oh, buddy, that guy might win Rookie of the Year. I'm not going to lie. I know everybody's been talking about how good Cooper Flagg's situation is, but I think Dylan Harper has a great situation because he's really going to be able to find his own, right? He can either play the 1, 2, or if you really want to, play the 3, right? Like, his feel for the game is that good. And the scary thing is, like, I know it wasn't against NBA competition, but he had the same pretty much like 2-point efficiency within the paint as a guy like Kaman Malawach, where that's a one-dimensional center, right? So that shows you how crafty he is in the paint. I think the only concern is like, okay, what is the jumper going to look like, from the 3-point line? Like, and that's kind of tough when you do have a guy like Steph Castle there as well, and De'Aaron Fox, right? That team might struggle to shoot the 3, but in terms of getting to the mid-range and getting to the paint and playmaking, like, he just has a feel for the game, and I'm really excited to watch the high pick and roll between him and Wemby. I think that's going to be really, really special. I expect him to win Rookie of the Year. I'm going to keep it real.
Yeah, I mean, I think he'll be really good right out of the gates, especially on the offensive end for the Spurs. I'm just curious to see what that rotation will look like. Like, whether or not he starts.
He will
come off the bench.
He's going to start.
Okay, so what is your starting 5 if you're the Spurs? You think
D Fox, Harper, Castle at the 3. Yeah, the 4 is kind of tough. I guess Sohan, and then Wemby. That's my starting 5.
So you think Vassell comes off the bench?
He might have to. I would take Dylan Harper over Vassell 10 times out of 10. And I think Stephon Castle's way too good defensively to come off the bench.
Yeah, I don't know what they're going to do because, again, they have so much flexibility with, some of these new guys coming in. I don't know what my guess is, since they've paid Vassell so much, it wouldn't surprise me if he starts right out of the gates. But because there's so many competitive guys, spots on the roster, it probably is just like open season in terms of like whoever plays the best and, can earn the starting spot. And, none of these guys, now that you have Wemby and Fox, there are some people who think even Fox may not be locked in long term, because there are many people who think that it's possible that Harper could have like a Fox type ceiling, right? So probably not
higher.
Yeah, or higher. Probably not as a rookie, right? But that's the thing with the Spurs is nothing's set in stone yet. So I would definitely say that, like, I think it should be a competitive, it should be a competition for a lot of the starting spots. I don't, Wemby and Fox to me should in theory be the only guys that are 100% locked in starters. I think everyone else kind of has to prove it.
Yeah.
So I think, so that's where you could get Dylan Harper in the starting 5.
Maybe Devin Vassell does start over Castle. Maybe Castle's the guy that just doesn't start.
Right, because with Vassell, he's been there for a while. He's getting paid a ton of money. I don't know if I can bank on him coming off the bench right away. But like I said, it could be, they could have a lot of spots to compete for in the starting 5. I could see that. I just, I don't know off the top of my head, what they're going to do. But either way, it wouldn't shock me if if their foundation looks different. Like, say by next season, some of those guys may not be on the roster. Like Vassell could be out. He could be moved for something else. Because he's a big contract. So let's say they're like, all right, we like what we've seen from some of these guys. Now let's push and maybe go all in on another guy. And then he could be, the big contract that's in a deal. Because, none of those young guys make enough money where, you can put them in a big contractual contract trade, right? And they didn't even want to give up Castle in the Fox deal, which is good because now they can either do what they're doing right now or down the line, they can hold on to those guys and wait for, some better guys to come up.
Yeah.
So, if for a lot of those teams, I think for the Spurs, I think you have to feel really good about where the future is headed for them.
The lights now you have freaking, it's bright. The future's so bright.
Yeah, because, yeah, exactly. Because you have Wemby and he's going to be in year 3. And if he's healthy and hopefully continue to be recovered from the blood clots, I mean, it's going to get scary at some point. Oh, yeah. Maybe not quite next season, but with that added size with Cornette and hopefully the continued progression from some of these guys, they're going to be a tough team on any given night. They're not going to be a team that you can just kind of go in and just be like, all right, we can take this team. We can easily win by 20 plus.
Yep.
They're going to be super competitive, and I think they're going to, they're going to try to compete. Like internally, a lot of those players are going to try to be like, let's compete for a play-in spot.
Big time.
Yeah, so moving on, it is almost 9:00, and we haven't had anything as of yet since the last, couple of guys that we talked about, right, with the Phoenix guys. So we're still kind of potentially waiting for some other news and notifications to come up. But, right now we're just kind of talking about some of these teams. So, I guess which other team should we probably look at to just kind of talk about while we're still kind of waiting for some more signings? Is there a team you kind of want to discuss maybe a little bit?
I mean, off the top of my head, I don't really have anything like drastic, right? I mean, like the Spurs are cool.
I guess let's kind of I guess you know what? Here we go. Let's talk about the Kings because we don't know what's going to happen with this point guard situation with Dennis Schroeder. I guess he's probably going to go there. I mean, Shams hasn't put it out there. There's been other guys, but I don't know if anything's like complete and concrete just yet. But can I just ask, what are the Kings doing? And if I don't know what they're doing, right, are there any guys that I'm looking at where if I'm another team, okay, can you hopefully maybe blow it up and maybe I can take this guy off your hands? Because this is such a strange roster, and it may get even stranger if they add some of the guys that they've reportedly, been considering.
Yeah.
Like you could have Dennis Schroeder and Russell Westbrook potentially on the same team together, or like a Dennis Schroeder and, some other random guard with DeRozan, with Sabonis. That I don't know. What is going on here?
Yeah, I don't really know. I think you're asking the wrong person. I don't know if anybody knows what's going on in Sacramento. I don't know how this team fell from being, the 3rd seed a few years ago to basketball purgatory. I mean, this is bad. Like if you look at the roster, there's really no sense of direction. There's no sense of, anything whatsoever. What is this?
Luke Kennard going to the Hawks.
Okay.
Another shooter.
Yeah, 1 year, 11 mil. Shout out Atlanta, continuing to having a good off season. So shout out to them.
Yeah,
yeah,
nothing wrong with that.
But Sacramento.
Yeah, it said Trae Young reached out to Kennard and Nickeil Alexander-Walker this evening to help recruit them to the franchise. 2 big wing gets for the Hawks. I don't know if I'd call Kennard a wing. I mean, he's like 6'5", so I guess he's like a 2-3. I mean, some of those guys are called that, but yeah, like you said, that's a fine signing for Atlanta. The 3-point shooter. Again, you're not quite as reliant on him now because they have all those other defensive guys, so it's fine to have him out there. You got other defenders to protect him. But back to the Kings. What in the world are we seeing with this roster? It doesn't make any sense to me. Because the DeRozan signing last year was kind of weird, but at least you can make the case, okay, it's another scorer, but then it was pretty obvious that at a certain point it wasn't working, and they were just kind of a middling team. And now it might get even stranger. So
Yeah.
what are we doing here for the Kings?
I don't know. Like you said, I mean, it's a hodgepodge mess. Like, the only thing that you have is Sabonis, and even then, I'm not super high on him. He's probably better off somewhere else. I'll just blow it up, figure out a way to just get everybody off this team, because it doesn't make sense, right? DeMar DeRozan, Zach LaVine back together again in a different city. I mean, we already know how that's going to turn out. Sabonis being at the 4 or 5, whatever, and you don't really have a true point guard. So, yeah, I don't know what's going on with this team. Maybe they're just I don't know. They're just living life at this point.
Just living life. Yeah, I don't know what to say about the Kings. I mean, that almost also kind of just feels like a team that like you might just be able to swoop in and just take advantage of. Like I said, I don't know. Maybe there's a vision that they have. I don't see the vision, at least with this current iteration of the roster. Let's say you got in there to go in there and run the Kings. What would you do?
Trade Sabonis?
Is that it?
No. Look at the haul. I don't know what I'd get in return, but then I'd trade DeMar DeRozan and Zach LaVine. Those guys got to go. That's not
So
a good
basically,
rebuild.
so
Rebuild
just
time.
blow it up.
Yeah,
Mhm.
you traded Fox. Why not trade everybody else? Just kickstart the rebuild.
Yeah, definitely a bizarre team. And
What would you
again,
do?
like probably a similar thing because I mean, you gotta kind of look at it and be like, what's the ceiling of this team? And you know, like like whatever the best version of that Kings team is, what is it? Probably not like a great playoff team, right? If they make the playoffs, it'd be a lower seed. Not that there's anything wrong with being a playoff team, but you know, but like in terms of the core, like DeRozan's an older guy. It doesn't really make a lot of sense to have him long term. You know, Levine is not that old. I mean, I guess he's like what, 28, 29, or 30 or whatever he is, but on a team on this version of the Kings, I mean, that doesn't really make a lot of sense. I guess you could say he's a guy that maybe could sell some tickets, maybe, but I mean, the Kings, you know, had a team that made the playoffs, like you said, a few years ago, and now they've kind of been stripped of it. And you know, now I would say the expectations, if you're a Kings fan, are probably pretty low at this point. So I mean, I would probably say lean towards, yeah, probably just see what you can get for all those guys and just kind of blow it up and start over. I don't know what their pick situation is, so I don't know if there's like a scenario where they don't have one of their future firsts or something, because there's a few teams that are kind of in that position, so they can't blow it up. But I don't know, just a very bizarre team that it was just wild because a couple seasons ago, like you said, we were never quote unquote Kings believers, but they did kind of have to, you know, they did impress us, I would say, that first year when they made the playoffs, because I don't think you nor I would have expected them to be a top 3 seed, but then we kind of expected that there'd be kind of a, you know, reality check for the team, and then they ended up, you know, winning 46 games, which was not that much worse, but in a much better Western Conference, it wasn't enough to lock in a playoff spot. And then, you know, this year they just, I don't even know, they just weren't that good. They got demolished by the Dallas Mavericks in the play-in game. And, you know, now they're going to potentially add, you know, I mean, they needed a point guard. So assuming that it's Dennis Schroeder or someone else, like, okay. But just, I don't think that this is going to be a good team. I don't think that's a hot take.
Yeah,
It's just, I don't understand the team. Because with some bad teams, you can at least understand what's going on. Like, we know, say, like a team like the Wizards won't be great, but we know what they're doing. We know what the vision is. We know what, you know, they're trying to do with that roster. I can at least see, okay, this is what they have. This is what they would like. Whatever the best version of this team is, I know what it is, and that's probably okay for this year. I don't know what I'm looking at with the Kings roster.
exactly.
Like,
There's
what
no
is the
insight.
core?
There's no insight. There's no sense of future. There's no sense of present. Like, it's just nasty, man. It's nasty.
So that's the issue with the Kings roster, and I don't really know. I don't know what to do about that one because, again, they seemed like they were kind of moving towards being a much more stable franchise. And, you know, like I said, it's crazy how fast things change in the NBA because, like I said, when we first started this podcast, they were a 3 seed and they were a good team in the regular season. And fast forward, they look kind of weird.
Yeah, exactly.
If you're Denver, would you think about signing like an Al Horford or a Gorshan Yabusele?
Oh yeah, big time. I think that would add
Mhm.
to your depth, right? And we already know that Denver's biggest weakness was depth. Maybe you might want to look at guard depth too, because that
Okay.
I think that would kind of help a little bit as well. But I wouldn't be
Mhm.
mad at any of those, right? Those guys are pretty good, right? Like that could give Jokic a real break because we didn't really see them have a lot of
Yeah.
good center minutes outside of Jokic.
I I guess they're also maybe hoping to get something out of the guy they drafted last year that tore his Achilles, right? Dayron Holmes, because I
Sure.
think, he basically was able to get his way to the Nuggets, and then they took him, and then he tore his Achilles in summer league. So that could be a guy that runs the backup five. But which one do you like better? Would you like if you're Denver? Would you go after Horford or would you go after Yabusele?
Probably Horford. I think
Okay.
that would be pretty sweet, right? Because Dayron Holmes, I think he could be a guy like Yabusele. He could be better, right? Like off rip. But Horford being a backup big, I think for Denver would be amazing.
Do you see Holmes as a 4 or a 5?
I see him more as a 4.
Okay.
What about you?
I mean, I haven't seen enough of him to get like a full scope of him. Maybe I could see him as like a 4 or 5. Like I could see him playing next to Jokic in certain lineups. I mean, he probably would have to. I feel like he'd probably have to play and gain a little bit more experience and strength in order to just kind of be like a full time backup center. So at least as of right now, they probably try to protect him more. And because again, how many minutes is Jokic going to be off the floor, right? Like, so if Holmes can only be a backup center, then he can only realistically play X amount of minutes. So in that case, like you said, he kind of has to be a 4, or at least like a 4 or 5, a la maybe like a Zeke Naji, but much better,
Yeah, miles better.
right? So yeah, so Dave McMenamin put out a new story. The Lakers have yet to find a center, but have reshaped their roster at the wing, with sources telling Shams Charania the Lakers have agreed to a 2-year deal with Jake LaRavia after
Reshape
joining.
their roster? I don't know about that, but
That's what he said.
yeah, I don't know about reshape. Maybe,
I mean, it's a different shape. I mean, he's a different player from Dorian Finney-Smith.
I wouldn't
It's a
say it
different shape.
reshapes the roster though, but sure.
Also, just because I hadn't even thought about it and it just crossed my mind, Jackson Hayes has been unsigned, at least as of right now. Do we think he will be on an NBA roster? And if that's the case, what team do we think he could actually be on? Could he go to Charlotte? Because I don't think he goes back to LA. Maybe he does. Maybe he's a backup. I don't know. But do you expect him to be on a roster? Because in fairness, in the regular season at least, he did a decent job as the starting center for the Lakers. It didn't work out in the playoffs, but at least in the regular season, he was fine.
Yeah. In Charlotte, I think Charlotte would be pretty cool. Um I think that would work out for him for sure. He'd be a lob threat for LaMelo on a team that isn't that great. So why not?
Yeah, that's a good point. So yeah, so I in terms of let's see how much longer we want to go. Maybe 10, 9:30 to 10. What do you think?
Yeah,
Unless you want to go.
I'd probably go with 9:30. I mean,
Mhm.
it seems like it's dried up. I don't think we're gonna get anything more tonight.
Yeah, we'll see. So yeah, because and that's the thing about free agency. Like I said, starting at 6 is that I know that as soon as we get off, there's going to be guys that are going to end up signing, and then we'll be like, and then we won't get to talk about it. But it's but it is what it is because I don't think it makes as much sense to do like a 6-hour stream, where we're going until midnight, especially with this type of free agency. But I don't mind going at least for like I said, 9:30 or 10. You said 9:30, so it's kind of up to you. But either way, I feel like there's probably going to be at least a few more. Maybe there aren't too many more by the time we get off, but there may be a few like late night ones potentially. I'd have to go back and kind of remember because I'm pretty sure the last time we did a free agency stream, I think we did it, and there were like a few guys because I think it was like Derek Jones Jr. We got off, he signed, maybe a couple other guys, but it wasn't like it was a ton of players.
Right.
So, but yeah, so let's see. So I guess kind of moving back to some of these other teams. Um, we did talk about Dallas already, so I guess we don't have to mention them again. We talked about the Spurs, we talked about the Rockets, so we focused on them. Do we want to talk more about New Orleans? Because I don't know if we said like a whole lot about them. I know we talked about the Looney signing, but I don't know if we said a ton about New Orleans.
I mean, with New Orleans, right? You got Jordan Poole, you got Jeremiah
Mhm.
Fears. You have a solid backcourt, right? But that's a lot of ball to go around. I feel like if they are fully healthy, they could be a
Mhm.
sleeper in the West. But I already know Zion's gonna miss time. DeJounte Murray, we don't know what his timetable is for a serious return, right? Then you have Derek Queen. Defensively, what does this team look like? And I think that's what scares me. I think offensively, we're going to see the most fun version of this squad. But defensively, I think is where I'm a little bit uneasy about them.
Yeah, and I'd say that's fair just because again, we haven't seen a whole lot of all those guys playing together when they're healthy because even the core guys last year, right, where it was like Murray, Jones, Murphy, Zion, I mean, those guys barely played together at all because, then Murray, I think Murray opening night, right? He had an injury that kept him out for a while. And then by the time he came back, he didn't play for long before he tore his Achilles, right? So, and you're already going to be waiting for him for a while. But it's funny because I feel like a lot of the individual players I like, I just don't know if all those guys can necessarily fit together. I don't know necessarily if all that's going to work. But like you said, the thing that's always so tantalizing about New Orleans is that you always just kind of say to yourself, if, if they were healthy, if all these guys could play together for X amount of games, this might actually be a good team or like a decent team. Because, they won 48 games a couple seasons ago and, they were in the playoffs. And then unfortunately, what happens? Zion gets hurt in the playing game and then we don't see him again. So,
Exactly.
yeah, so like you said, that's kind of the problem where it's too difficult to trust and bank on that team. Just because, just I don't think you can really count on them having being able to string enough games at full strength to really get like a great read on them.
Yeah.
So I guess kind of, looking around maybe at some of these other teams, like I said, just kind of, just discussing while we're potentially waiting for some final signings in the last, 20 minutes or so that we're on. Um, Outside of Miles Turner, is there anybody that if you're the Pacers, maybe you might want to target or maybe kind of take a flyer or chance on? Or is there anybody maybe that while Halliburton's out, you may be okay and comfortable with moving?
Yeah, I don't know. Um, yeah, I don't know. I don't really know. I feel like you got to bring back Miles Turner. I mean, there's like you said, there's nowhere else for him to really go. Um,
Unless it's a sign and trade.
yeah, and I don't think they'd be on that kind of timing. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, maybe do you bring in Jackson Hayes?
Maybe. I
Do you bring
mean,
in? Do you
I
just
don't.
resign, or do you resign Miles Turner and just bring him in as well? Like that might be interesting. I guess. I don't know. Larry Nance Jr.,
Hmm. Yeah, I'm not sure. So
Trey
we did
Mann.
get something. Yeah, Trey Man. Yeah, we'll see. I don't know how much they have to work with. It does look like from Michael Scotus. So he put out Al Horford has received interest from several contending teams since the start of free agency, including the Boston Celtics, Golden State Warriors, New York Knicks, Denver Nuggets, and Cleveland Cavaliers.
And this is
So
who? Ayton?
no, this is Horford.
Oh.
So there are actually more teams. Wow. Okay. There's actually more teams that came up than we thought. Denver was one that we just brought up. That was one that wasn't discussed at all because we knew Boston and Golden State were teams that people mentioned for Horford, but the Knicks were not mentioned at all, and neither the Nuggets nor the Cavs. Um, so I would ask you, like, say if you're Horford, right? So we already know we've heard about Boston and Golden State. Would any of those other three teams interest you if you're Horford?
Denver for sure, man.
Okay,
Yeah, man.
because they don't really have a backup center out. They don't really have a defined backup center, and we know they're going to be really good. Like I would say I would probably bank on Denver being better than Golden State next year, just because you got Jokic, you have a decent team. Think if they're healthy, that's a better team. Um, and they're gonna have now. They've opened up more like exception level money, so maybe they don't have to. So maybe the amount that they can give him isn't that much different from what these other teams. What about Cleveland? Because they don't really have a backup big either, right? Because like last year it was like Tristan Thompson, or in most cases it was usually just Mobley or Allen, right? Where they would just kind of take turns being the 4 and the 5, or being the 5s at different points. So
True.
that could be a good one too. You stay in the East, and you'll still probably play, because I mean minutes wise, he could be out there. He may not play quite as much as he might in Denver, because I think he could play next to Jokic in certain lineups. It might look kind of weird, but he's been in double big lineups before. But what do you think of Cleveland versus Denver?
Yeah, that's interesting. I would probably have to take Cleveland on that one.
Okay.
I think that would be a much more stable situation for him, and because I think Denver's a little bit more volatile. Granted, they've given themselves some stability by getting rid of Michael Porter Jr. and bringing in more strength in numbers, but I think Cleveland's still the spot to be in. What about
Now,
you?
I guess the thing that wouldn't be an issue. I don't think. I think the only thing is that I think money wise, I don't think Cleveland can give as much, right? Because I mean, they're like a second apron team, so I don't think they really have. I mean, I think Denver can offer more. I think because Denver now is, I think, under the first apron, so they may be able to offer the full MLE to Horford if they wanted to,
Oh yeah,
maybe.
yeah, true.
And then Cleveland, I think it's probably I don't know which one, but it's probably either the minimum or the smaller MLE. And then what about the Knicks? Because that was another one too that was kind of mentioned.
That could be interesting. I mean, it gives the Knicks a ton of depth, right? Because you'd have Cat, you'd have Mitchell Robinson, and Al Horford. That could be cool. I feel like Al Horford might actually be one of the more sought out after free agents
Looks
in
like
this
it.
class. Yeah, that's pretty good.
Well, it definitely looks like it, because I mean that was about that was like 6 or 7 teams, right? Boston, Golden State, Knicks, Denver, Cavs, and I'm sure there probably will always be like another random team that we don't think of, that'll be there. So, and again, like it's easy to see why he would be sought after, because I mean he can still play and he can still contribute to a team, and he's just stretch big, which I think most people have kind of already established. That's a type of player that I think most teams want, that most teams kind of probably need. If you want to be a good playoff team, you need somebody who can space the floor at the 5 spot. And he's been in a bunch of playoff games. Just obviously the age is a factor where could there be a point where he just drops off a cliff and it's like, okay, he might just be done? Maybe, but he was still decent last year. Like, he still had a lot of moments where he looked like, he can still contribute. What did you think of him, I guess, in the playoffs? I mean,
I,
did you really see much from him?
I mean, underwhelming, but
Mm.
kind of expected. Like, look at his age, but still, I think did his role. It's they just had an unfortunate ending, but I don't think it's on him at all.
Yeah. Yeah, and I guess there's also context because it's like you barely got anything out of Porzingis, right? And then, you had all the other stuff going on with the Celtics as well. So again, it on a different team, that can actually contend, because like Boston, yeah, he could go back to Boston, but probably if he's like still trying to win, that's probably not really the best situation for him. I'd say, like in terms of winning, I'd say either Denver or Cleveland. Like
I'd
of
agree.
those
Yeah,
teams that are listed, I just think that those teams have higher ceilings than the other teams that were listed. Because outside of Boston, what were the other ones? Like I said, Golden State and the Knicks,
mm-hmm.
maybe the Knicks, but um, definitely the East teams, because in the East you'll have a decent chance if you're on one of those teams to come out of the East. And then Western Conference, like I said, I'd probably pick Denver over Golden State. But maybe in Golden State, maybe it's possible he could just get more minutes because they don't really have as many, minutes defined out or given out to a center. Because it's basically Draymond, Looney's gone, so maybe that opens up more minutes for post. But yeah, honestly, if I'm Horford, I'd say go to Denver.
True. I agree.
Yeah, so 9-19, Still, nothing reported, nothing concrete. Again, not I don't think we're probably going to get as much the rest of the evening. I mean, I could be wrong. We've been wrong before. Uh, but at the very least, we certainly so far have gotten a decent amount, a decent amount of action. Obviously we had, we kind of had a slow start, but it definitely picked up after a half hour or so, and then we had that long stretch where anything and everything was going. Uh, for here, and we talked about our favorite moves and whatnot. But like I said, we'll still hang around. I would say for at least another 10 minutes or so, right? Because you said 9:30.
Yep, I think 9:30 is a good cutoff point.
Yeah. So I guess kind of going back to some of these other teams. Let's see. So let me take a look around and kind of pick a team to, I guess, sort of talk about and discuss a little bit. Like I said, while we potentially either wait for another signing or maybe there won't be another one. Um, let's see. What about Portland? Because I know they don't necessarily have a ton of free agency action going on, but obviously they're a team where they made the move to acquire Drew Holiday. They moved on from Anthony Simons. Now they've bought out DeAndre Ayton, so he's going to be a free agent. So that removes one of the 5,000 center options that they have.
Right.
So where do we think that Portland might be going next season? Because assuming that Holiday stays there, like that's a move where it feels like they're going to at least try to compete. So, I mean, if that's the case, how good do you think Portland can actually be?
Um. Well, we just got a notification. Mason Plumlee has agreed to a 1-year deal, $3.6 million, with the Charlotte Hornets.
Okay, so he's going back to Charlotte because he was there for a little while. Where is that from?
Shams.
Okay, all right, I just got it. All right,
But
so there we go.
yeah, I don't think there's a whole lot to say about that one. But going back to the Portland discussion, they could be good. They have a lot of young talent. I think it depends on Scoot. I think trading away Simons, best case scenario for them, right? I think that's going to open up a lot of minutes for Scoot. Hopefully he can show us, why he's worthy of a top 3 pick title. But we'll see how that pans out or whatever. But I think you're looking at Denny Avdia, right? How good can he be in this next year? I know a lot of people are high on him. Shaden Sharp as well. I know a lot of people are high on him as well. So I think Portland has like a cool identity going on there. Like they might try and follow in the footsteps of Houston, right, with a defensive identity, and maybe try and make a push for the play-in or something like that. But they're going to need to be consistent. You're going to need to have that type of play all year round, not just for one stretch, right? Like, because that was the problem last year. They were really up and down, and then all of a sudden, okay, yeah, now you're one of the best defensive teams in the NBA, but it was only for like a month or two. So if they can find out a sense of consistency and also find their go-to guy on offense, yeah, it wouldn't surprise me if they can make a play and push.
Yeah, the offense I would say is definitely kind of the X factor, the question mark for them. Because defensively, you'd assume like you brought it. Holiday wasn't as good last year, right? So he's probably a guy that will probably be worse because he's another year older, so he'll probably regress somewhat. But Scoot, I think you hope he gets better, takes another step forward. Shaden Sharp. Now I think your backcourt's a little bit more defined, so you don't have to kind of figure out these funky, tricky lineups. Where you're kind of juggling different players back and forth. Of course, now you've established your wing guys, right? Denny Avdia and Tamani Kamara. Right now, your center spot's a little bit more defined. You still have 4 centers on the roster, but at the very least, you've now cleared open the room for, okay, chances are Klingon probably starts, and then we'll see what happens with the guy that they drafted, Hansen Yang or Yang, and then we'll see what happens with Robert Williams, whether or not he gets moved or just, plays 20, 30 games or something like that. But yeah, if everything goes right, yeah, they should be another team that could compete for a play-in spot. I don't know if I can see the vision of them making the playoffs like I could with the Spurs, because I just think I would need to see one of those young guys be much better than last year. Like Scoot, I would need to see have a really, really significant year 3 jump for me to feel like, okay, they could make the playoffs. I think their ceiling is probably capped at the play-in. with the roster. But at the very least, I like a lot of their guys that they have in their core right now, especially defensively. So they should in theory, they should take a step forward. It's just, I don't know if I can anticipate, like I said, a playoff spot for them. That would be really difficult, I think.
Yeah, I agree.
Even the most optimistic version of it. Uh, but yeah, you're right. Not a whole lot to say about the Plumlee situation. So in this Dave McMenamin article, there was a sentence, or there was a sentence that was in there that everybody's been talking about, where it mentioned LA exercised discipline in their negotiations to preserve cap space for 2027, when they expect to have space to sign a max salary free agent. Now, my question is, who is that max salary free agent? Because I don't know if you've looked at the free agency for 2027.
I have not.
I don't know if you've looked at it. Yeah, maybe you haven't looked at it, but it's not really what you would think. And it's another one of these scenarios where, okay, maybe in theory there will be guys that will be there, right? But the problem is, a lot of those guys will probably sign extensions. So like, you look at the list and it's like, oh wow, this might actually be a good list. But how many of those guys do you actually expect to leave their teams? That's the part where I'm like, I don't know. You know, the 2027 list, like, yeah, you got Jokic. Is Jokic going anywhere right now? Like, that doesn't make any sense. And even if he wanted to go, he'd probably just sign an extension, so he can probably get more money and then do whatever he wants. Stephen Curry will be a free agent, but he'll probably retire a Warrior, right? Giannis, I guess, will be a free agent. I don't know if I don't know what'll happen with that. So like, maybe you can make a case for that one, but I mean, could I see him signing an extension too? Honestly, I could. Like, not that he's going to 100% take the extension and stay, but I don't know if I can bank on him entering free agency and being like, yeah, I'm just going to sign with LA. Maybe he does, but that's the only issue is, unless there's something I'm not seeing here, I don't know if I can feel confident about them landing a key guy in 2027.
Yeah, I don't know. It's weird. And a lot of the top guys are going to be older. So there's that too.
Right.
Like, I wouldn't feel good about, giving Kawhi, who's going to be like 38, right? A bunch of money. Yeah.
Yeah, the age is on Flow Track. It'll say he will be 36.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like, geez, I don't know about that, but I don't know. That is interesting. It's a interesting outlook to have, I guess.
Yeah, so let's see. Do we get a new post? No, it doesn't look like. Yeah, I don't think we got anything. So it just said new post, but I didn't know if that's what it was. It wasn't anything Shams related. So, but yeah, so we'll see what happens. With all of that, just it's kind of wild. It's kind of wild in terms of like all the stuff going on right now. So let's see.
So we just got one. Taurean Prince
to return to the Milwaukee Bucks. So that's another guy where he's going to go back to his previous team. So the Bucks, I guess, are just going to run it back, which, again, just run it back without Dame for a decent chunk of the season. And then I guess Brook Lopez is gone. So my question is, starting center, is it Bobby Portis, or could it be Ayton? I don't know. Or do you just kind of be like, let's run Giannis at the 5. Let's get weird. Let's get crazy.
Yeah, if they end up doing that, I mean, I don't even know what to say. If you're a Bucks fan, I feel for you. You're gonna suck again.
But I guess the thing is that I guess, from a Bucks perspective, I mean, what's the alternative? Because I mean, like, they don't, I don't think they can really do a whole lot with the, in terms of bringing in any real free agents outside of, like I said, mostly probably running it back. So, I don't really know what you can do from that point on.
Nothing. They're stuck.
Well, I mean, yeah. So I guess, reunited with Darvin Ham again. I guess now, except it might be for 3 years as opposed to just 1. Sure. I hadn't even it's funny. I didn't even think about him as a free agent guy. I guess, I don't know. I guess I just hadn't thought about him, but I mean, that's fine value, I would say.
Yeah, it's all right.
I mean, you're talking about $3.5 million or something like that. So let's see. Bucks officials negotiated the deal with Clutch Sports CEO Rich Paul tonight. There is a player option in the second season as well. So I don't know. Maybe I'm gonna assume he'll opt into that because I don't think he'll get more than what he's making right now. I guess he could opt out. Maybe the minimum might be a little bit more a couple seasons from now. I'm not sure, but 929, 930. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we're gonna get anybody of note. Like, I'm really hoping on the Deandre Ayton one, but I don't think that's gonna happen within the next minute. So, I don't know. It might be time to shut it down, huh?
Yeah, well, like I said, I'll let you decide. What do you think?
Yeah, we'll call it. I mean,
All right.
it
Well,
was somewhat eventful, right? I don't think we got
oh
all the
yeah.
signings that we wanted, but there were some good surprises. There was, a solid trade. Yeah, so can't really complain about it,
Yeah. So I guess we'll just close it out, how we normally do.
Yeah, exactly. We appreciate you guys, for being in the stream. We appreciate you, Keith Wells, for all the comments and keeping us, alive and awake for sure. And yeah, like I said, the free agency was cool. But before we do get out of here, if you are new, please don't forget to like and subscribe. Follow us on Instagram, and TikTok at the OBT Podcast for more content and updates. And once again, we appreciate everybody who was in the stream today. See you guys on the next one.